everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Thursday, October 20th, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world, so stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong News recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we'll head over to Alan, where he speaks with Gil Azrilant, co-founder and CTO at Axis Security, to talk about Axis Security and what they bring to the market. Alan then sits down with Kunal Agarwal, founder and CEO at Dope Security, to discuss the company's recent launch with $4 million in funding led by Bold Start Ventures. We then go to Open Source Summit Europe, where Mike sat down with James McLeod, Director of Community for the Finos arm of the Linux Foundation, as James explains why the financial services industry needs to rally behind usage of open source software. Also at Open Source Summit Europe, Mike spoke with Sonatype Field CTO, Eka Turunen, as Eka explains why responsibility for application security needs to shift left towards developers. Then we are airing episode 10 of Techstrong Women. In this episode, our hosts Jody Ashley, Tracy Reagan, and Rebecca August are joined by Zenobia Gajchak, CEO of Forte Group, to explore the art of communication and how to break down technical topics into an engaging story. We're then joined by our very own Cody J. Brown, who will hop on and tell us more about some of our upcoming webinars. Next up, we are airing episode 2 of our series, Engineering the Change. This series will follow the 3 winners of the Engineering the Change Scholarship Program as they tackle a 10-week intensive coding bootcamp and prepare themselves for careers in software engineering. Then, Mitch sits down with Nati Devoti, Senior Vice President of JFrog Security, to discuss the details of a new JFrog announcement. We will then wrap up this broadcast with 2 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first episode, Mike interviews Jonathan Rende, Senior Vice President and General Manager for Products at PagerDuty, as Jonathan explains how the downturn in the global economy will accelerate adoption of IT automation. Then, Mike will interview Triple Blind CEO, Ridhaman Das, as Ridhaman explains why data privacy regulations will require organizations to embrace blind data as a part of their compliance and cybersecurity strategy. And that's what we have coming up for you here on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy. Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for October 20th. First up, Meta has said it will sell off Giphy after a ruling by the Competition and Markets Authority that ordered a reversal of the deal. Meta has been fighting the UK regulator who said it would limit competition and innovation for almost a year, but it has run out of options in thwarting the ruling. Meta has said it will wait for more information for the divestment order, bringing an end to the legal battle that cost it over $400 million. Zooming out, the CMA has also looked into Amazon's dominance in the marketplace and Microsoft's purchase of Activision Blizzard as it seeks to corral in big tech. Next, Germany has announced that they have fined the messaging app Telegram a total of $5 million for failing to comply with German law. Germany has stated that Telegram hasn't created a lawful way of reporting illegal content or having named an entity for Germany to receive official communication for. This comes as the German Federal Police has stated that the messaging app has been used more and more as a platform for radicalization, targeting several politicians, scientists, and doctors. In other news, Amazon workers in upstate New York have rejected a union bid earlier this week. Approximately 66% of the 612 ballots counted voted against the Amazon labor union. This is the second defeat to the labor group that has been trying to unionize Amazon warehouses. And experts say that the win here would have given the union more power and more leverage against Amazon. This will be the 4th union election at Amazon this year, with Amazon working hard to push back against unionization efforts. Next, Microsoft has announced layoffs against multiple divisions earlier this week. The number of layoffs was not specifically stated by Microsoft, but reports say that it is less than 1,000. Additionally, Microsoft has said that the layoffs are occurring across a variety of levels and teams. This is another example of big tech companies cutting down on jobs or slowing hiring due to the current state of the economy, with nearly all the major tech firms having followed a similar pattern. On Digital CXO, we have an article looking at how process optimization can lead to improved efficiency. Up to 60% of remote workers spend more time looking for documents than they do sending emails, which shows a reliance on analog procedures. Adopting digital tools is imperative to improving document-related workflows, and this article looks at how just to do that. To learn more, go to digitalcxo.com. On DevOps.com, we have an article looking at Red Hat and IBM's announcement of the Project Wisdom initiative to bring natural language processing to the open source Ansible IT operations and automations platform. Red Hat has said that the goal is to make IT automation much more accessible to a broader range of end users and IT professionals. To learn more, go to devops.com. Finally, on Container Journal, we have an article that looks at design anti-patterns that can sabotage Kubernetes app scalability. This article looks at 3 of the more common ones, including distracted by the simple, tuning by folklore, and missing the bigger picture. To get a more in-depth look at all of these, go to containerjournal.com. And that's today's Techstrong News Recap.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. I am really happy to be joining us from Tel Aviv today. Gil Azerlant. Gil is with Access Security, and he's going to tell us all about it. Hey Gil, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Thank you, Alan. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. So Gil, let's start a little bit about who's Gil. How did you come to Access, and then from there talk to us about Access.
Absolutely. So my name is Gil. I'm co-founder and CTO at Access, and I've been a developer and a hacker for as long as I can remember. Mostly mischievous stuff growing up, but then, in Israel, you have mandatory military service, and when it was my time to serve, I was picked up by 8200, which is the Israeli equivalent of the NSA with the offensive and defensive cybersecurity task forces for Israel's intelligence. So then, that was when I got into the pros, and I was part of one of the biggest and most sophisticated offensive cybersecurity organizations in the world. That's where I met my co-founder and many of the team that helped us build this project, this company. And later on, I founded my own consumer company that didn't go as well as I expected, while my co-founder and many of my co-workers here joined Fireglass, which was the early web isolation technology that was later sold to Symantec. Many great lessons on what to do and what not to do when building an enterprise-grade security product. We then all got together to think about how we can use our knowledge, use our expertise and experience from both offensive and defensive cybersecurity to make a dent, to do something great in the world. And it was very clear to us that access, remote access, but access in general, is very flawed and is oftentimes the weakest link of the attack kill chain, where many attackers and intruders go in through. And that's how we kind of got around to set ourselves to solve this problem in a way that was not solved before in the world.
Absolutely. It's a great story. First of all, listen, I'm a serial entrepreneur myself. I've been starting companies for 30 years. And someone much smarter than me, a mentor of mine, told me very early on, you learn more from your failures than you do from your successes, right? So the fact that your first, venture didn't work out as well as you wanted it to work out, in the long run, you and I'm sure you're already realizing it now at Access, the lessons you learn there will serve you very well, right? In Access and wherever you go going forward. You don't forget those lessons. I've also, look, not everything I've done has been great, crazy, successful either. But anyway, but that's the life of an entrepreneur, right? That's how we learn and how we grow.
Absolutely. Keep what's working, ditch what's not, never make the same mistake twice, and that's how it goes.
If you're going to fail fast, get to know fast, and move on. But anyway, hey, that's a great story, and we appreciate it very much. So now with Access Security, right, you want to tackle a big problem, as you said. I'm going to ask you if you could frame it for our audience.
Like if I ask you,
what was the mission?
So we saw that the modern enterprise uses between 4 and 8 different solutions to provide access to their systems. So different ones if it's managed devices or if it's unmanaged devices. Different ones if you're going to the public internet or maybe a private applications. Different one if it's a SaaS solution or the World Wide Web. So this created a huge fragmentation that stemmed from the fact that this really was an iterative process. Every time something new was introduced to the workspace and a patch was applied to tackle it, but no one ever looked at it from a holistic point of view. Now, many modern vendors and players kind of took their own product. It could be a CASB, it could be a SWIG, and they kind of spun it off to solve more problems. But it was always centered around their core product, which made it flawed in many ways. Maybe it's not supporting a wide enough variety of applications. Maybe the visibility you're getting is limited to web access only. Maybe there are a few separate clouds depending on the use case. And this one unified solution that has one unified policy and one unified visibility across all the different deployments and all the different types of endpoints and all the different types of resources, that was never made. Nothing was ever made from the ground up to tackle this generic problem. Now, the cloud technology was really ripe at this point to become the shoulders of giants on which we stand and use this global network of very elastic, very fast responding computing services to provide this unified, decentralized, also redundant and world-class access platform across the private applications, the private networks, the cloud, the SaaS, and the internet. So it was an accumulation of all these things that were ripe to be leveraged in order for this problem of resource access within the enterprise and the modern workforce to be solved like never before in the most elegant way and the most easy and unified way, if that makes sense.
Yep, I get it. Look, we've seen this. There was a time where everyone used Active Directory, basically, right? And before I'm old. Before Active Directory, there was LDAP and the Novell directory stuff, right? But the world was simpler then, as you said, right? Today we have so many different means of ingress and egress onto the network. So we want to talk a little bit about SASE and stuff today. I'm going to ask you, Gil, if you could frame that.
Absolutely. So SASE, Secure Access Service Edge, that's the notion that access and routing should come closer to the edge, that everything should be decentralized and cloud-centric, and that it no longer makes sense to backhaul into a central location just in order to go out to the internet or go out to an application. Think about the absurd. I could be in Texas. The application could be in California. But if the VPN concentrator is in London, we're going to go all the way across the Atlantic just to go even farther west than when we started. And the internet is decentralized by nature. When I go to Facebook from Tel Aviv and you go to Facebook from Florida, we go to entirely different servers because the internet is built such that everyone has access close to where they are. So this backhauling, both in terms of private access if I'm going to the data center, but even more so within the internet, this is a huge burden, this is a huge cost, and this is a huge productivity night.
It hasn't made sense for 15 years, right?
Absolutely.
It was one thing when, look, the whole backhauling infrastructure and WAN, LAN, right, this whole thing, it was built when we had a moat and castle kind of mentality, right? So you had to come over the moat, back into the castle, and then you really didn't have to go out necessarily the application because the application lived in the castle. Right. Once we started having to go out in the cloud, the idea and that we weren't working in an office, we could be remote, we could be anywhere. The idea of backhauling back in, so I could go through my firewall and router back out, over a VPN, let's say, it didn't make sense. And then certainly with COVID and everybody working from anywhere, it really didn't make sense. I think at that point, everyone realized the emperor had no clothes, right? This was just wasteful is what it was. And so you're saying SASE's now replaced this.
Exactly. This notion that you're either in or you're out, the castle and moat notion, that's no longer relevant. This, am I in? Yay, I can access everything. Or am I out? No, I cannot access anything. That's no longer the case. And companies want the ability to give true least privilege. So if I am a privileged user on a managed endpoint and all the posture checks are going great and maybe it's my working hours, we need to take all those things into account as well as what the SIM says, what the UEBA says, what the EDR says. We need to ingest all these things in order to give me the true least privilege and not the all or nothing approach. And like you said, during COVID, that was even worse because businesses scrambled to maintain business continuity, right? And every time, if you have the choice between better security or business continuity, no CEO will tell you, let's go better security. So that created these many holes through which attackers could get in. And SASE, again, is the notion that it should be very flexible. It should be enforced on the edge and not in a central location. And that all these different services, the CASB, the SWIG, the VPN, the SD-WAN, some VDI use cases, all of those should be cloud delivered to the user as opposed to, again, backhaul into a central location and let's take it from there.
Agreed. To us, it makes perfect sense. Of course, I think one of the problems that you run into is the inertia of organizations that have invested millions, literally millions, tens of millions of dollars into this whole out of date, out of touch kind of technology, right? The VPNs of the world and so forth. And I think, it's hard to get people to just say, okay, I'm going to walk away from that.
Absolutely. And, if you look at security trends in general, some of them fail, but those who don't fail have this cycle where at first it's the techies, it's the people who are crazy about new tech. They always want to be on the bleeding edge, and they're the very early, very fast adopters. And for Zero Trust, or for SASE, that's pretty much gone. Zero Trust has been around since 2014. SASE is here for a few years. And these are all evolutions of adjacent terms describing similar things. And then there's the point where many realize that in terms of managing their risks, it makes sense to move at this point because the technology is mature enough, and because there's lots to be gained. And that's when most ditch old technology that was purchased, maybe for a lot of money, but they're doing it to remain up to date, to not be left behind in sense of security. And then there are those who will be very stubborn and, my previous decision was right at the time, so it must still be right. Or maybe they have fear that their teams will not be able to make the transition. There are more excuses for stagnation than I can count in such a short interview. But at the end of the day, those will be left the most vulnerable because at some point there'll be it's an ever shrinking fraction of the business ecosystem and the business landscape, and the smaller you are, the part of a smaller target group you are, because you're the easier target. And at some point, you need to swim faster than your friends and not faster than the shark, because everyone gets compromised at the end of the day.
Yep, absolutely. Well, you know the story. You don't have to outrun the bear. You just have to outrun the guy who's also trying to outrun the bear. But that's great. Let's talk, if you don't mind, Gil, a little bit about access itself. How is the offering kind of offered? How do people engage with access for this?
So technically, it's very easy. You go to the website, you leave your details, and we talk to you. From there on, it's a pretty simple process. POC can be set up in just one day, where you start getting visibility to all the things. You're starting to limit access to a certain SaaS applications, certain private applications. You can choose what can be accessed agentlessly and what with an agent. It's very easy. And the way most enterprises do it, they sign up, they install it, and they're setting up a policy that kind of resembles their VPN policy. Now, you might scratch your head and say, so why do it at all? It's the same policy. So first of all, you're getting visibility and uniform policy right out the gate. But then something interesting happens. You start accumulating data and seeing who accesses what and when. And at this point, our system will suggest ways to narrow down privileges. So maybe this application is only accessed by HR, maybe R&D is the exclusive accessor of this application. And over time, you're going to see that the policy gets tighter and tighter and tighter. So, getting to true least privilege is a never-ending journey. But if you have data and if you have one vantage point to look at all access across the organization, all of a sudden, the aspiration, the striving for true least privilege becomes a much more actionable and much more manageable process. And sooner rather than later, you're going to see that what started off as, showing the same policy that the VPN had evolved into a true least privilege and a very reactive, very breathing type of policy management that helps and offloads much of the burden off the security team and into the platform.
Excellent. Gil, we're over time, but for people wanting to get more information about access security, where do they go?
Go to accesssecurity.com on the website. My email address is gil@accesssecurity.com. We would all be very happy to answer any of your questions and hopefully support you in your journey to a more secure workplace.
Access, AXIS security.com.
Correct.
Got it. Hey, Gil, thanks for being our guest. Come back, keep us posted on this, okay?
Absolutely. Thank you, Alan.
All right. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong TV. We'll be back in just a minute.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. I got a new company to introduce you to. They just came out of stealth. The name of the company is Dope Security, and I'm here with one of their co-founders, Kunal Agarwal. Hey Kunal, welcome to Techstrong TV.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on, man. Hey, we're always happy to hear about new security companies and meet new people in the community. Before we jump into the story on Dope Security, let's hear a little bit about you, if it's okay.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been into cybersecurity my whole life, right? Since I was probably 8, 9 years old, did a ton of hacking from a very young age. And as I kind of grew up, you kind of get out of the black hat side of things and kind of move to the more, let's just say, better side of things. And I joined Symantec. So I was at Symantec for almost a decade between that and ForcePoint, or WebSense. A lot of people know it as WebSense. And from those two companies, I've learned pretty much a lot around how customers use cybersecurity technologies, to how we actually develop them, how we should be developing them, and then finally founded Dope Security last year.
Absolutely. Very cool. So did you found it yourself? Do you have co-founders? What's the deal?
Yeah, so I founded it myself about May. Well, it was May 4th of last year. So that was kind of the whole Star Wars homage, May the Force be with you, May the 4th be with you kind of thing. But a big part of leaving these bigger companies was around trying to do it in a different way with a team. And the team of people that we brought on, or I brought on, was everyone that I work with from these other organizations that were super passionate, super driven, and they liked making really cool technology that they were passionate about. And so a lot of the people in the company, they're not really new to cybersecurity. They've all been into this industry for a really, really long time.
Absolutely. All right. So let's jump into the company. You guys recently emerged from stealth, announcing initial funding. And you know what? Let's get that out of the way first. Why don't we talk about the funding?
Yeah. So, I mean, the funding was kind of a byproduct of things that happened about over a year ago now, right? But for me, the idea was always around building the product, right? And the funding is a sidestep of that. And we raised the money from a company called Bold Start, a VC called Bold Start. They were one of the more prolific VCs that went in and just loved the idea because of how passionate we were about building it. And that's what the name comes from, is Dope Security. Dope means very cool. And I'm from the Bay Area. So whenever we say dope, it means that, hey, this is awesome. And security, obviously, because of cybersecurity. And so you put the two together and Dope Security comes out.
Okay. What's so dope about it?
Well, I mean, you can kind of see it in the visual on the back, but the UX is one of the biggest parts of the product, right? Just starting at experience was what we did. So it was myself, when we first started, it was myself and Erica, who's our head of design. And both of us were kind of building out the flows of what this product should look like. And all the different experience flows came and stemmed from how do we make the user experience for an admin as good as possible. And I've seen this at Symantec, seen this at ForcePoint. It's you come in and then the first thing you get to the product, oh, wait, hang on, you can't use the product yet. You have to have a meeting first. You have to have a customer meeting. And then you have to have a second meeting and a third meeting. And then 4 weeks later, you finally get access to a pre-production version of the product. And that's just, it's not the way the world should work anymore. So with us, it's in one-click instant trial. So you just log in using your Office 365 or Google account and you're in. And you're able to start using the product instantaneously. And that's the difference. How do we make this look good, feel good, and the customer experience first class.
Absolutely. Now, look, I've been in security, I'm not going to say my whole life because I got a really long life, but, I've been in security a long time, right? And security's matured and changed and evolved over the 30 plus years I'm doing this, right? And there's so many different aspects and facets of security today. What exactly does dope security kind of focus in on here?
Right. So most of the different areas, one of the biggest ones that are core security, of course, there's like IAM and things like that, but there's also endpoint security, like an EDR, EPP kind of vendor. And one of the other ones is like a data loss prevention and things like that, right? So a lot of DLP vendors, CASB type stuff. But then if you kind of cross over into this world of what today they call as SSE or SASE, is really web security, network security. And that's what we work on. Is I want to build a secure web gateway, we call it, which is a very familiar term to probably a lot of you out there, is an ability to restrict or control what you have access to on your device. And this can go anything from a simple use case from, hey, I'd like to block piracy or illegal content or hacking content from my device, or maybe even adult content, to I'd like to actually control my cloud applications that only, for example, let's just say Accenture.com, Accenture.com is accessible in Google or in Office 365. So we've gone the full spectrum of web control, cloud application control, and then visibility into everything that your devices are doing.
So, we used to call this privileged access. What's the difference between SASE and privileged access?
Yeah, I mean, a PAM solution. Yeah, like a PAM solution, like a CyberArk, is really around access control to provisioned applications, right? And that's like, hey, should person X have access to application Y? We're kind of looking at it more around what is the full holistic amount of web traffic that you can have access to. So this is something that was really big with Bluecoat, which was acquired by Symantec, WebSense, again, ForcePoint, and then Zscaler with the Zscaler Internet Access. These are the three kind of main players in this space. And I worked at two of those companies in product management for a couple of those as well. And so those experiences are what drove the existence of Dope Security. Is like, how did we help reduce the customer issues? How did we help make the experience better? And that comes from what we call as our fly direct architecture.
Got it. And, so how is this kind of organized, packaged? How do users, companies, is it like per user, per device kind of thing that it's regulating or? Yeah,
so the way it works is not any way dissimilar to how you'd be using a technology like this today, except under the hood, it's very, very, very different. So what you do is you install the Dope Security endpoint to all your different devices in your environment. And so once you've done that, maybe it's Mac or Windows, doesn't matter. Once you've installed it, then the user has to log in using their enterprise credentials, of course, just once. And now they have access to the websites or the URLs or the categories that they are supposed to be accessing as part of their work control policy.
But this isn't like a Zscaler sandbox that you're going through, or is it?
Yeah, so that's the differentiation, right? And you hit it on the head, is that right now when you're using as an example, a secure web gateway from a legacy vendor, you reroute everything from your device, from your laptop, all the way to their data center, which you were calling a sandbox, like your point of presence. And then from there, it goes to its destination. And so if you think about it, you're almost taking a stopover route.
It's like
in an airplane. It's like, I like looking at the airplane analogy. Like, why would you take a flight from New York to Boston and stop over in San Francisco? That makes no sense. And the same thing is San Francisco to LA and stop over in New York. And so what we do differently is we allow you to fly direct. And the way we do that is the software that's on your device actually does the capabilities. So you don't have to reroute any of the traffic to a data center anymore.
Very cool. And what about the hit on the device with that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like, I think that if people were looking at this even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was obviously a much difference in computing power than now. And also the operating systems themselves didn't offer the same level of integration capability that they do today. Like, I'll give you an example. On Mac, they provide the full spectrum of APIs you need. You don't have to build a kernel extension anymore.
Right.
And at the same time, that promotes reliability of the actual product itself. And also, if you're building this from scratch today, you can actually achieve a super, super duper low memory profile, CPU profile. And that's what our customers say to us all the time. It's like, to be honest, Kunal, we'd rather use this technology because visuals are amazing. Product works incredibly well. The Fly Direct architecture works. But most importantly, the impact to the user is invisible. You don't even know it's there.
Get it. Got it. All right. So look, you mentioned Mac, you mentioned Windows. What about mobile devices?
Yeah, mobile devices have always been interesting. I mean, Chromebook is definitely on our roadmap, and like iOS, Android is something that has always been in the back of our minds. But to be honest, like the usage of these mobile devices in this context is just getting less and less. I mean, one, because everything on mobile devices is become less and less governed by the organization. They'll put an MDM software on there for sure, but I don't see that the main primary device, again, from customers is those mobile devices. It's really those desktops, laptops, those kind of use cases.
Got it. And also, I think, most mobile phones, let's call them what they are, right?
Yeah.
Most Android, iPhone, they're a lot more secure by design than I think our laptops are, right? It's generally, we see many less incidents, though it's still a vector, right?
It is. I mean, it's just the deployment from an enterprise perspective it's like an ancillary problem, right? Like, it's, if you have a mobile device and you get a phishing page on a text message and you type in your corporate credentials, it affects the enterprise.
Right.
But like, is it the first and foremost form of attack? And it's like, less so, right? And that's why I see enterprises focuses on the devices that they own. And ultimately, mostly the devices they own are their employees' laptops and sometimes desktops.
Got it.
Which makes sense, right? It makes sense.
No, it always has. Absolutely. Look, where I sit, right? I sit in a different seat now. I sit here. I say, oh, you're the second SASE vendor actually I interviewed today, to tell you the truth. So obviously, this is a up and coming area that people are looking at. But we were being told a year or 2, 3 years ago, all traffic's going mobile. 60% of traffic, 70% of traffic is going to be on mobile devices now, and you got to start developing for your mobile devices. You got to start securing these devices, and I'm not saying that's not right. I'm telling you, when I look at the stats of all the sites we manage, Security Boulevard, DevOps.com, Container Journal, etc., mobile is a sizable portion of traffic, but it's not 60, 70%.
Yeah.
Right? We still get a majority of our traffic on let's call them traditional computing devices, PCs, laptops, what have you.
I don't think we can call them traditional yet, but sure.
All right. But not on phones is what I'm trying to say. And, but sometimes when you live in the tech bubble, you think everybody is at that, early adopter phase, when really the early adopter phase is only 15% of the market, right? The other 85% of the market may not be as far out there, right, in adopting these things. So there's still, PCs, laptops are still a predominant way people access information on the net, on the web.
Yeah. I mean, I would 100% agree. I think there's a little bit of a self-serving nature to it, right? It's like, if I'm a mobile security company and I'm trying to sell you something, and obviously the vendor, like Apple and Samsung's job, like at Apple, their big job is to secure their mobile platform, because they don't want it to turn into a wild, wild west. And the same thing is if you're a cybersecurity vendor for a mobile like devices, you're obviously going to say that this is the biggest vector, right? So it is self-serving. But also I think that sometimes people have blinders on, right? Like I mean, I'm born and raised in Silicon Valley, but at the same time, a lot of organizations here, they don't really realize that you have to take off the Silicon Valley lens, right? Not everyone in the world uses a Mac. I have to be honest with you. If you're talking to a company outside of like a startup in the Bay Area, they're not using a Mac. They're using Windows, and the world runs on Windows devices. And I use a Mac. I happen to use one, and our company is Mac first in a lot of ways. Like we had a Mac and a Windows component at the same time, because we know that while not every organization uses it exclusively, there's still 5, 10, 15% that do. And that's what we want to hit. It's like, let's make sure that we are honest and really have a lot of integrity with how we're going to our customers. Let's be very realistic. And that's what I think makes Dope Security different.
Very cool. Hey, you know what? We're running out of time. For people who want to get more information, what's the website?
Yeah, it's just dope.security, and then you'll be on there. And I would really encourage all of your audience and everyone listening in just to give it a try, because that's the difference with our technology, that you can actually go on the website and trial it instantly. And I think that's what makes us a little different in this, is that no one really has things like that. You can just go in, give it a try, and this helps all types of organizations, whether it's upgrading yourself from DNS filtering to a proper secure web gateway, or reducing costs from your existing secure web gateway to what you use today, which is going to become Dope Security. Like, I would love and encourage everyone, just give it a try and you'll see a huge performance increase.
Excellent, man. Hey, congratulations, Kunal. This is, it's something to be really proud of. We're going to be watching Dope Security and hope for big things from you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alan, and looking forward to talking to you again soon.
Anytime you want. Kunal Agarwal, founder, Dope Security, here on Techstrong TV. We're taking a break. We'll be back in a minute.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and Media Ops CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
This is Techstrong TV.
All right, guys, welcome back. We're at the Open Source Summit in Dublin. We're talking with James McLeod. We're going to be talking about financial services industry and how they're working with open source software, because, as we all know, those guys got some unique requirements. James, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's really great to be here. It's great to be here with everybody, both in person and also virtually.
Yeah. So the challenge with open source and financial services is what exactly? What makes them worthy of having this dedicated function within the Linux Foundation compared to any other vertical industry?
Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting question. So financial services for a very long time has been very regulated and locked down. So much so that it's been baked into our engineering culture that people shouldn't peer inside our repos or contribute to code that doesn't belong to a specific team. But when it comes to digital transformation and DevOps and FinOps and cloud migration and the direction of travel within software engineering in general, it doesn't lead to any efficiency or acceleration. So what we're doing within FinOps is teaching banks, how to feel safe, contributing and collaborating together, both inside the banks and then also outside, in the open source world. Because there aren't enough engineers in the world, how are we going to achieve what we need to achieve if everyone's, fixing the same problem multiple times? And so that's what FinOps does. We're all kind of financial services engineering experts. We've been in the field, with the people on the ground, and we're here to, kind of bring people out of that shell and into the open source world.
So that kind of sounds like therapy. So what are you guys doing to foster those conversations? How does it happen?
Yeah, so you kind of fight it on two fronts. And so when you're talking about therapy, it's actually really interesting because a lot of engineers who actually work in banks have two different lives. They have their, I'm an engineer for a bank persona, and then they have their meetup, their hackathon, their open source contribution outside of work persona. And so when you're talking about, therapy, it is, how do we actually merge those two worlds together? How can I be James, the open source contributor, working in a bank, as well as that person who kind of goes to JavaScript meetups or, cloud meetups? And then you've got the other side, which is like the top-down air cover, perspective, which is about communicating with executive directors and C-suite board members about the benefits and cost savings and efficiency gains and the acceleration of open source, and kind of bridging the gap between the naughty's perception of, back closet kind of developers, throwing code over the fence to what it is now, which is, people just contributing code outside of organizations as you would do in any other team. And so we work on both sides. We convince the stakeholders, and we also educate and counsel kind of like the engineers on the ground as well.
Has the rise of fintech companies kind of changed the way people think about open source in the financial services space? Because it feels like there's a lot more competition now between these emerging startups and these larger enterprises that have been around forever, and the larger enterprises are now trying to figure out how did those guys get so fast?
Yeah, so that's also a really good question. So what we find is within fintech and regtech, a lot of the firms who are actually out there are they're contributing impact to the industry that does one specific or multiple things, really well that the banks actually want to leverage. So within the open source space, what you can do is come together around standards and interoperability, to actually help the fintechs work with the banks a lot better. So within Finos, for instance, we've got regtech special interest groups that bring banks together with the regulators about, how do we actually provide the information regulators need in order to engineer faster? Can we provide evidence in an automated fashion rather than rubber stamping kind of like paper as it used to be? And the same in like the interoperability world. We've got various different standards that allow data to be passed across, the financial desktop and potentially through APIs. One of the projects that we have that does that is FTC3, which is extremely popular to like the desktop interoperability world. And we have competitive vendors in the fintech space, who wouldn't, share ideas in the IP space, actually collaborating around the interoperability because they know that they need a common standard for passing data around so they can share data because they might be kind of engaging in the same banking environment and ecosystem. So there's plenty of space to do things, super simple and also really fun as well.
All right, I see you guys have that same financial services nomenclature for things that most other people wouldn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
As we go along here, do you think that the regulators are going to come and start looking at how software is constructed, or maybe they are, or they're just looking for ways to do that more aggressively? We hear a lot about open source software supply chains, and the financial guys are probably the most regulated people in the world. Yep. So is this where that focal point of that conversation is going to be? Because these guys are going to be asking the toughest questions.
Absolutely. And I like to think that, we're working with OpenSSF. In fact, next week on the 29th of September, we're doing a virtual webinar between Mend, Morgan Stanley, and OpenSSF. And I'm going to be there kind of, bringing the panel together and introducing the webinar. Because we want to have the banks in those types of conversations. We want to have, a firm like Mend, who is actually automating, CVE scanning, for instance, with Morgan Stanley on the same panel, and also with OpenSSF, talking about that whole space of, how do we actually traverse our, S-bonds, what is SPDX, and how do we actually engage with it? So we're not kind of playing catch up to that. We're actually kind of demonstrating our know-how to the regulators who are actually catching up in terms of engineering. We also want to bring them, on the journey with us. Hence the reason why we have a regulation innovation special interest group, which kind of ties, how can we actually provide evidence to them in an automated fashion so we can speed up engineering and speed up the way that we're regulating, the banking industry.
How will this connect to other initiatives that the Linux Foundation has launched? We heard about the Open Digital Wallet this week.
Yeah.
Are these kind of things, is there overlap between these conversations as we go along? And part of your effort is just to help with the collaboration of that, because the financial services people are all over digital wallets.
Absolutely. So just by being here at the Open Source Summit, you're in amongst the rest of the Linux Foundation. You're kind of sharing ideas on the fly. You're being really creative with the way that you're solving technology problems. And we had, people saying, what is your relationship, with the Open Wallet Foundation? And so one example of this is Royal O'Brien came to the Finos stand talking about the metaverse. So how will financial services actually interact with the metaverse? Is there a way that you can actually have, payments, within an Oculus Rift as you're kind of moving around the metaverse, kind of buying things off the peg or, however you make payments. And digital wallets kind of came into that, because we need to be able to standardize the way that things are done, so you can buy things using a digital wallet, both within the real world, maybe using Internet of Things, but also in the virtual world as well. And without coming here and being in person at an LF event like Open Source Summit Europe, you wouldn't have those types of conversations. And so where things may have seemed like a world apart, when you actually start bringing it together and talking, in the same room, you think, well, actually, the difference between all of these different foundations combined isn't that big. There are things that we do around, interoperability and standards and passing data around that can be applied anywhere.
I think it's not uncommon to go to visit Wall Street or any of these big exchanges and you'll find thousands of developers working on stuff. What is your sense of how much of what they're really doing is differentiated value versus just reinventing the same thing for different companies in the same wheel, and maybe it's time to have this conversation?
Well, every single bank, including a bank that I used to work for, before moving to the Linux Foundation, has a digital transformation program, where they're trying to consolidate and speed things up. They're automating using DevOps. They're actually progressing into FinOps, in kind of those different worlds. And they're mutualizing kind of like all of those different duplication of effort, across the inside of the bank in order to speed things up for themselves. But if you then take, where all of those digital transformation efforts are speeding things up inside an individual bank and then play that across the entire industry, there's absolute, kind of duplication of effort. There's loads of money that can be saved across the industry. I've got absolutely no doubt whatsoever that, there are engineers sitting opposite each other in the same teams who are kind of reinventing the wheel without speaking to each other. It's going to be everywhere.
And they're working from home now, so
it
could be even worse. Do we need to walk through to the business side to explain to them that this is a good thing and it's okay? Because a lot of them would look at it and say, we're writing code and we're going to do what? Give it away?
Yeah, funnily enough, that has been raised within one of our special interest groups. So regulation innovation is the coming together of lots of banks. So we've got Morgan Stanley in there, we've got JP Morgan in there, we've got UBS and Citi all coming together to discuss RegTech, solutions to problems. And one of the questions that we posed to them, trying to unblock, and get things done faster, if there was anything that we could do to help you, from within your banking environments, what would it be? And the answer that came back wasn't a technology problem. It was like a business communication problem. It was like, if there's something that you can do, can you provide a facility to be able to explain to our product owners and the people, who sign off all of this type of, advancement in technology, what it is that we're solving, so the business comes with us on the journey as well as the technologists. And so absolutely talking to business owners in the same language as the business owners is an absolute priority for us.
How do people get engaged, short of calling you up and booking a therapy session? What exactly do they have to do and how do they participate?
Yeah, so Finos is on GitHub. So if you go to github.com/Finos, we've got an organization of banking contributed projects. And also firms, who are related to banking, like consultancies and other, firms, who want to contribute their projects into an open source landscape. So you can find us there. All of our READMEs are up to date. We also have our special interest groups in those repositories as well. So if you want to come and talk around a particular subject matter of banking, such as DevOps, such as regulation innovation, open source readiness. So if you're a bank and you want to start contributing to open source, we actually collaborate with To-Do Group. So within open source readiness, we look at like the vertical, policy decisions and compliance that needs to be solved for a bank to be able to contribute to open source. And then we work with To-Do Group on, the types of information that you need to create an open source program office. So, all of this material and how to join Finos project calls can be found, on GitHub. Or you can go to finos.org, which is our, primary website, where we have a community calendar with all of the project calls that you can just scroll through, and you can find the Zoom details or the WebEx details, and just drop in. Everything's free and open. You don't need to be a Finos member to go there. You can follow us on Twitter, so go find Finos Foundation on Twitter. The same on LinkedIn. You can subscribe, to our news feeds. I'm also, very, communicative across both as well. So you can follow me, and I'll put things out there that people can like and share, and I tag Finos and other things into those as well.
All right, folks, you heard it here. This might be the least expensive counseling session you'll ever get. James, thanks for being on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. We'll be back in a little bit, guys.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, welcome back to Open Source Summit. We're here in lovely Dublin, and we're talking to Ika Turunen, who's the field CTO for Sonatype, and we're going to have a chat about what exactly does it mean to shift left in this exciting world of open source that we're living in. Ika, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
We hear a lot about, okay, we want to shift things left. But last time I talked to developers, they weren't all jumping up and down and saying, oh boy, shift that left to me, we'll see where we are.
Well, funny enough, that's kind of been the talk for the last couple of years. We've kind of moved so much burden onto the developers that they're saying, I don't want to do this anymore. I've got like 1 million tests. So when we're talking about this stuff, really what matters is finding information that's meaningful about a process that needs to occur outside of development for development. So a great example, for example, is, you need to manage your dependencies. The dependencies might have a non-compliant license, they might have some security issues, something like that. Give the developers information about what's a better version to go to at the time that we're making that decision. Can be an easy thing. Ham-fisting that process and just, for example, breaking their builds with no feedback about what's going on. That's usually where the burden comes from. So if 2/3 of their time is spending managing tools, for example, that inhibit them from doing their work, that's usually where that sort of blowback comes from.
So what we're really trying to get to is something that feels more like actionable intelligence for the developers so that they wind up doing the right thing. Because none of them got out of bed this morning and said, let's go build something that's insecure. It's just that, for the most part, they never took a security course in their life, so they don't know. It was an elective back in the day, so we have to find a way to make it simpler for them to do the right thing.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a part of it, right? It's getting the right info in front of them as they're working, right? But there's so much of this information. It's not actually just security that's a problem here. It's also things like decisions about licensing. If you've got something with a restrictive license that used to be open source 5 years ago, how would you know? Right? Well, the answer is you wouldn't unless you spent the time every day looking up license text files, looking at the metadata. Nobody really does that in real life. So kind of a model that works is trying to find ways of presenting that as they're doing it. So as a part of the IDE, as a part of a pull request, as a part of their normal build flow, just giving them information. Hey, wait a minute, you're looking at this component, here's the update cycle, here's the sort of release diagrams of all the versions, here's the licensing, here's the security, and then giving them some sort of indication of what's acceptable and what's not. So it's not about, hey, developer, this random faceless test failed, now you're going to call someone. It's empowering them to make the right decision. And you're absolutely right. No one in development wants to be in security, and no one in security wants to be in development. So finding these sort of happy paths where you can feed information from one to the other really helps everybody be better at their jobs. And that's kind of the golden point, where shift left starts to actually work out.
Will we also be able to tell them that if they download a component that there might be a more secure version of that component that's been updated and they should go use that version versus the one that they're playing at? Because it just seems to me a lot of these issues are, we're repeating the same mistakes over and over again. People are downloading components that are insecure and they're not even aware, and they replicate them everywhere, and then maybe if they go fix it on one side, they go back to the same registry and download it again, and then they get the same issue all over again.
Well, I think you're landing on a really important point, actually, because it's not just one of those things. It's not a point-in-time check that you need to do. It's actually a check continuously. Part of the challenge of security is security occurs as a function of time, right? What's good today might not be good tomorrow, and also it operates as a function of the use case. What's good for me might not be good for you, because I might work on an internal tool. You might work on something revenue critical. It might be okay for me to use something completely insecure because it never sees the light of day. For you, it might be a big deal. So security also is a sort of, you see onion method analogies or other sort of ways. It's a series of actions that help us inform the right choices. So, for example, it can be very beneficial to audit dependencies that coming in. For example, one of our products, which we call Nexus Firewall, does exactly that. As a developer, you request a new component in, it audits it for any sort of really strict non-compliance. The reason why that might be useful is because when you're acquiring something for the first time, there's this sort of old adage in development, right? Earlier you find the bugs, the faster and cheaper and easier it is to fix. Well, what's the cheapest way of fixing a security vulnerability? The answer is not have it at all. So really, the largest sort of grade that you can have is grading out the really, really bad stuff at the door. If you're trying to acquire a new dependency or a library and it's got a sort of 10 out of 10 CVE, it's too much trouble for what it's worth to even have it in, because if you're having to rip it out later down the line, the same kind of logic applies as for bugs, right? It's more costlier the further down the line you go. So shifting out those sort of really bad things in the beginning can be really beneficial. Also, there's another issue that's targeting developers nowadays, which is outright malicious packages. Not necessarily open source per se, but bad actors pretending to be open source, typo squatting them, publishing malicious code upstream. And what they really rely on is they're not even pretending to be working packages. Instead, when they land on your developer's machine, it invokes build scripts on the build manager, and it just drops a backdoor or a crypto miner or one instance of Cobalt Strike that we've observed so far. So these are kind of scenarios where you can prevent some of the very, very nasties coming in. And then there's a whole nother ball game of, okay, once it's in, it's good today, but tomorrow something might change. There might be a new Log4Shell tomorrow, or something comparative to that. So when it comes to that, really what's important is also keeping track of the catalog, understanding what's going on, knowing where it's across your SDLC, and then having the feedback loop, for example, back into your development, into your PR workflow or something else, to react to it very quickly, because time is really of the essence in these particular cases. So kind of a common mistake we see is folks make the mistake of, hey, I checked it once at the door, it's good, it's approved. The real problem is all of these function as a function of time, so you need to kind of do both. You need to start at the beginning, weed out the worst stuff, and then shift deeper as you go along, depending on the use case and things like that. And it gets so complex very quickly. There's no one easy solution here. You really got to automate and think about this more as a sort of test, almost on a per application basis. That really helps kind of unstick the problem.
If I address more of this at the IDE level, does that mean I got less stress in my CI/CD pipelines, or do I still need to figure out how to secure that in addition to what's happening at the IDE side?
Well, what's the quickest way of getting pitchforks and torches with your developers? Well, it is breaking their builds, at the very end of the day, right? When you're trying to deploy something into production. So the reason why IDE and sort of even earlier SCM, GitHub, GitLab, that sort of interaction with a pull or merge request can be useful is because it really just gives the developer a paving path to what would work when you push it into CD. So with continuous delivery, you still need to have those tests, but what you're really doing in the IDE is helping them understand when they're working on the thing, what would help them prevent for a failure to happen. The worst thing is you work on a thing, it works, it compiles on your machine, it's perfect in the development environment, you send it out to be deployed, and then it fails out of some mysterious reason. That causes a lot of heartache and a lot of heartburn, and that's usually when the revolts happen. So IDEs can be a great way of informing you early about what's potentially happening down the line.
So what they really want is just a danger Will Robinson kind of signal that says, hey, this is not a good idea.
That's it. Or Dora the Explorer, are you sure you want to do this?
Mm-hmm. What is the role of the security team in this? Because they're the guys in the back end that clean up a lot of this mess. So do they have a vested interest in having this conversation with developers and saying, hey, if you guys would just do this, I might send you fewer CVEs and be yelling at you less about various vulnerabilities?
So I think that's a emergent property of doing something right, but really what we're doing here and what we're dealing with is almost like a new engineering discipline emerging. At the conference here today, we've heard talk about open source program offices. We've heard, CISO incident management workflows. We've spoken about Log4j and things like that. That's incident management. That's when something hits the fan and we have to react fast. What we're doing with this shift left analogy is really saying, hey, this stuff requires a little bit of work every day, right? You can minimize the work down to 5 seconds, kind of like washing your hands before you eat or something like that. Small little action that can help prevent a lot of heartburn down the line. And it might not even be that doing this stuff helps you prevent CVs from emerging downstream. But what it will do is increase visibility of where these security vulnerabilities might exist. Part of the problem of security handing over those CVEs is really that they feel like they don't have visibility of what components are being used in development, where they are at, and they don't understand the implications of, for example, upgrading a component. Because sometimes it's a drop-in replacement, sometimes it's an API change. So creating this sort of mutual understanding of, hey, developers, here's what's coming out of you, here's the dependency tree and the SBOM map that's being generated here is important. And then from a security perspective, that can be building that muscle of, hey, I have this information available for me and in development, can help them agree to it when it happens. It might not even be I'm handing you over a CVE, it just literally is a build failure. Like that's a beneficial model where when as a developer you see it more as a sort of testing regimen and security feeds data into the test set, that can be beneficial because now we're both finding the machine, telling me it's a red X, not, me as a security person trying to convince you as a developer that you need to drop everything and remediate this random CVE that I've just come up with.
How automated will all this get? Because you can imagine developers in many cases, not all, but many are going to be like, can't just the machine go fix that for me? I mean, it's a small issue, it's an update to a container, and just automate that end to end, or do I need to sit and approve every little thing that goes on?
Well, the fastest path to hell is pressing approve on every PR, right? Just because, these things change so fast. To just give you a little bit of color, in the last year alone, we've uncovered just 88,000 malicious packages alone, right? And that's without them having CVEs. CVEs come later in that sort of process. So the volume of this stuff is huge, and there's over 21,000 new versions of dependencies being published every single day across all of open source that we track as far as we can tell. So the reality is the volume is always going to be high. And that's part of the reason why this is not a thing that ends. It's not a one-time activity. It's much more of an engineering discipline of, hey, we have this third-party dependency chain. We have to manage it. We have to learn to find ways. It's just a part of being a good engineer is to do a little bit of management. The theory is that if you get really good at that, then when these incidents happen, it's not really a big issue. We, for example, worked with companies that had Log4j incidents that lasted 2 weeks because that's all they needed to understand exactly where the dependency trees were and where updates needed to happen, and they got understanding. They had a good working relationship with development, who understood what the burden of updates is. the caveat of all of this is that updating sometimes can be more troublesome than you think it on the face of it. If there's been a huge version number decay, for example, you've not updated your dependencies free for a while, the projects have moved on, the APIs have changed, that might be a big heartburn. And you really don't want to be caught out in an incident having to burn down that tech debt. Because fundamentally, that's what it boils down to, is you accruing tech debt and you're not burning it down. So really, that's why all points to dedicate a little bit of it every day, and that will avert a lot of that sort of heartburn down the line.
Do you think we're getting to the point where organizations are going to say, look, if you don't have good security engineering skills, you can't work here, because they're going to say to developers, you know what, here's the bar and you got to be here?
I think that it's definitely going to be, I wouldn't necessarily go that far quite yet, but I think it's definitely going to be a part of a skill set of an everyday engineer. Kind of a good indication is what the DoD is pushing through in the American legislation, where they're actually saying we will not buy software from you unless you can point to me every single dependency that you have, and that you have mitigated every known security vulnerability on every one of those dependencies. That's a tall ask, right? And that isn't, off the face of it, it seems impossible, and it's very ambitious. And the only way that any organization is going to be able to fulfill that requirement is that everybody has a clear understanding of what that means on a day-to-day basis. So I do think that it is becoming a part of our everyday skill set. And as time goes on, yeah, absolutely, I do think that there's going to be a sort of minimal level of awareness that people probably will require.
All right. Guys, you heard it here first. If you were too cool for cybersecurity school, you need to think again. Ika, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Techstrong Women, where we feature amazing women doing amazing things in tech. Hi, I'm Jody Ashley, executive producer here at Techstrong, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Tracy Reagan and Rebecca August. But before we introduce today's guests, I want to give you a quick update on what's happening here at Techstrong. Coming up on October 4th, we have the Cloud Container Security Summit. And on November 16th, join us for DevOps Experience. If you're interested in submitting a speaker submission or attending either event, go to techstrongevents.com to sign up. And be sure to tune into Techstrong TV every day for great shows and interviews. Hey, Rebecca, what do you have on tap for this week?
So on tap for this week, I wanted to highlight a really amazing software engineer name. Our Instagram name is Maxine.js. She's a self-taught DevOps engineer, technical writer, and full stack mom is her description. So I love how she's a self-taught engineer, and she goes through Instagram teaching a lot of stuff that we cover at DevOps.com. What is the Internet of Things, DevOps versus DevSecOps. She is absolutely amazing, and she's kind of fun to watch. She makes learning really fun. I definitely suggest anybody who's looking into this industry should definitely check out her Instagram.
Full stack mom.
Nice, nice.
I like it. So what about you, Tracy? What do you have this week?
So as many of you know, I'm on the board of the OpenSSF. So I get things that come through about what's happening at the OpenSSF. And this came through. They have now started a end user working group. Super, super important. For those of you who don't know what the OpenSSF is, it's basically Open Source Security Foundation. And their focus is to really sort out how to make sure we don't have another log4j moment. And they're focused heavily around SBOMs and CVEs and making SBOMs available to everyone. One of their problems, though, to be quite honest, is they don't have enough end users providing feedback in terms of what problems that the end users are having with adoption of SBOMs. So we may generate one and it sits on a file system somewhere. So woohoo, right? Did a lot of good to take that time to generate it. So we're looking at use cases and understanding from a end user perspective, what stops them, what are the barriers, how can we help them? And having this end user working group will be super essential. So if this is an area that you're interested in, or even if you're a DevOps person, because when we start talking about security, it's really part of the DevOps pipeline. We've talked about DevSecOps for a long time, but what does that really mean? It means bringing the security pieces into the development pipeline, which also means we're shifting security farther left. So how do we do that? We do that by getting feedback from end users. So there's so many ways to get involved in open source communities. One of the easiest ways, though, is to be part of a working group where you're providing input. It means you're not coding. You really are just providing input to say, these are the problems that we're struggling with. These are the kinds of use cases we'd like to see. And that's what that end user working group is all about. So don't hesitate, jump in, don't tip your toe in the water and see if it's too hot or cold. Jump in full force and help us out with sorting out these security issues. And if you're in the DevOps space, this is a really good place to start. So that's what I have today to encourage everybody who has never been in an open source or worked on an OS working group. This would be a good one for you. And you can find out more about it at the OpenSSF website.
That's amazing. I think we all forget that we can't be a silo, right? We need input. We need to we don't have to fix all the world's problems, but we need to have a conversation and bring a lot of people into it, find out all the things that are going on. So that's really cool. Thank you, Tracy. That's awesome. I would like to introduce you to our guest today. We're very excited to have her. Zenobia Gottschalk, would you like to tell us all a little bit about you?
Hello. Yes, thank you. And thank you for having me on. This is such a great group and community. So as Jody mentioned, my name is Zenobia Gottschalk. I run communications for a company called Swirlds Labs on the blockchain side, distributed ledger side. I also am the vice chair of the Forte Group, which is a group of senior women in cybersecurity who in the midst of the pandemic found a way to develop some community and to share ideas and to come together to enable all of us, as much as we were spread out across the country and across the world, to still continue to have that level of community and to share ideas and help each other in our career paths. So my background, I graduated from Stanford, worked out in Silicon Valley for a number of years, worked in technology companies, did a very short stint on the sell side in investment banking as an analyst covering internet security and infrastructure. It was a great learning ground to really jump in and understand the entire security ecosystem, but it was still investment banking, which is not an area I wanted to be in. So I left that fairly quickly, went back to doing PR, IR, and what we call full stack marketing for technology companies. And most of where I spend my time is with security and blockchain companies. And so, now today also thinking about that intersection of those two, always something new to learn, and just glad to be here.
And you didn't mention it, but you're also aren't you a TEDx speaker?
Yes, yeah. So I I have spoken at TEDx. Yep. Yep, absolutely. On blockchain and cryptocurrency. And I think if anybody gets that opportunity, I would highly recommend that they take it. It is a lot of work, but it's also, they have a great process, right? They put you through it. They really make you think about your talk. They help prepare you. So if anybody ever gets that opportunity, I would encourage them to do it.
I've thought about it, but I've always been like, God, do I have the time? Do I have the time?
Yeah. And I don't know, I know they run them differently, but I think for me, it was sort of a 9-month prep, not that it was the full 9 months, but they walk you through, right? They have a certain bar in terms of what they want to see and how they want you to deliver that. But they also provide some great support in terms of speaker training. We work with people who are practicing speeches all the time. And I always say that you can never practice enough, right? Once you feel like you've practiced so much that you're sick of hearing yourself, that's probably about the time where you're ready to get on stage.
Yeah, what happened to Toastmasters, right? That was people who attend to this day. It's an old, organization, but people who do attend Toastmasters and practice, they are far more polished. So I think it's awesome that TEDx does that for you.
I didn't even know Toastmasters was still around.
It's still around.
My dad did Toastmasters, and he would have been 100 this year. So yeah, that was a long time ago. I remember him doing that, but it just isn't something you hear about that often. It's great that they take that time though to give you a whole new skill set, not just, hey, jump up here and do a talk, but
that's right. Yeah, they want these ideas to be successfully communicated, right? So you can have a great idea, and if you're not able to share it with the world, then that's a sort of a singular great idea, right? But the ability to then share it and make that vision something that other people buy into, I think is really powerful.
And it's powerful in everything we do in software in general. I know as a person who is, I've lived off of small companies since I was 27. I started doing consulting when I was 27 and then formed my first company in 95. Communication is essential, and communicating technical topics can be extremely difficult. Really bringing, you're in the blockchain space. Why don't you tell us about how are you bringing that blockchain story, especially security around blockchain? How do you bring that story forward? What is your thought process in pulling that information together?
Sure. So I think, I always think about, well, you have to go deep before you can then pull back and have that, 10,000 foot view. But at the end of the day, there's a great model. This gentleman named Simon Sinek, if any of you are familiar with him, which is the start with why, right? People won't care about what you do until they care about why you do it. And so I think when you're trying to communicate these technical topics, you do need to spend time with the folks who are building, who are creating it, and you need to hear everything that they are saying about what they are doing and their beliefs on why it's so important. And then the challenge is taking that and saying, great, now you all probably know way too much. And for the person who is just getting a taste of this, I need to give them only the highest level of why. And then I can dive in, right? Then, I think that people are much more, they want to control their journey of how they discover things much more on their own, right? The days of Gartner tells me what to buy and I go buy it are long gone, right? I can now jump into Reddit. I can now jump into Discord. I can now have all those conversations when I want to at a very technical level, but I first need to be hooked. So one of the things that I tell people, when they're going through this process is think about, at the end of the day, everybody loves stories, right? We love them from the time that we're children. We love the hero's journey. We love, conflict, but we also just like to be told stories and we like to be entertained. And if you were able to do that and put it in, in the perspective of why do I care, right? Why should I care? How does this affect me? That's going to be a lot different. So if I tell you, well, a blockchain is an immutable ledger and you can, control your own data and it is distributed, a distributed multi-master, database, like most people are going to go, well, that's great, but I don't care. If I tell you, yes, you're going to, the person who has 7,000 other things coming at them, right? They just don't have time to do that. But if you say, well, gosh, are there any instances where you wish you could control your data, or you wish that you had accountability across your supply chain, right? You talked about sort of the software bill of materials, right? So we think about, for example, a physical supply chain, right? When the COVID vaccine was coming out, the big story was that supply chain has to be cold at every point in its journey. And that vaccine has to be cold in every point in its journey before it gets in your arm. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Okay, well, maybe you can apply distributed trust to that process. Can I have the manufacturer verify that it was cold throughout the creation of that vaccine? Can I have the distributors verify that their warehouses were cold at every point where it was stored? Can I have the trucks verify that those were cold at every point where it was transported? And can I have the hospital verify that the entire time it's been in their possession, that it was actually still cold before it got into my arm? And so those are all things where the hospital may say, well, great, but I don't want, the distributor owning that, or I don't want the manufacturer owning that, but I need that distributed trust. So we talk a lot about the end user stories and the why, to say, why is distributed trust really important? And where can you think about applications in your life where you would like to have that kind of distributed trust, where you don't necessarily trust one person or party to hold all of that data?
And I think you just gave us the reason why you probably did an excellent TEDx presentation, because you just taught us what I asked you. That was a great analogy for tracking software. I think that we hear oftentimes that it's too complex. It's, creating a bill of material or showing the ingredients of software is far too complex. But what you just described is super complex and has a impact, a death, or a life or death impact on people. So what is it, do you think, that why are we not, why is it it's 2022, we're headed to 2023, just around the corner, and we're just starting to talk about the ingredients of software and making sure that it's stored in a cold warehouse? What is it? Why haven't we talked about this before? I've been talking about it since 95 when we first created our first build audit report. But what is it now, other than the Biden administration? Why is this communication happening now? What's happening?
Yeah, I do think that there has been a push for a long time, the concept of shift left, right? Like build security into your software earlier on in the process. But I do think the definition of left has also had to shift, because it used to be, I'm going to build my software and I'm going to build every single piece of it, right? Now you've had the advent of low code platforms. Now you have development teams globally. Now you have software that is built more modularly. And that's great, because that shows an evolution of our industry, right? That shows a maturation of our industry. Let's not recreate the wheel every time we're trying to create a piece of software. But with that maturation, you also then insert that uncertainty, because you don't control the whole process. And you do have to depend on a number of different vendors where you may not necessarily know everything that goes on in their environment. So I think, it is, it's a good problem to have, because it shows that we as an industry have matured to the point where we are not, sewing our own clothes. We are not, growing our own food. We have created this beautiful global supply chain, but now we have to do all the other things that other global supply chains do.
Which is accountability.
Right.
Well, and I think along what you were saying is we have all those supply chains, but I think a couple things that COVID has taught us, is a lot of people went back to trying to grow their own food, right, over the last 2 years. And then they realized, geez, there was a lot more to this, because I tried gardening and I'm on my 3rd year of kind of getting
Same. Tomatoes, great.
It's just not working. And it has given me a complete new appreciation of this whole process that goes into me getting food. And I think the same thing with having discussions, right? Zoom, although we're all really sick of it, has also created conversations that we can jump on in a way that I don't think we were doing. We all kind of thought we got to go somewhere and see someone in person and go to a meeting and get everybody in a conference room. And if we can't do that, it's not going to happen. And now it's like, what's our excuse, right? Just pull up a Zoom call and get 10 people on it and have a conversation. So I'm a cup half full kind of person. I always have to go through times that are rough. And I think a lot of it is my faith that teaches me what positive is coming out. And I always hear in these conversations, there's positive things that have been generated. People appreciate things a lot more, I think, after maybe not being able to get everything we wanted, right? As easily as going to the grocery store. I'm like, how can they not have watermelon? Stuff like that. I think this is the same thing in the sense that we're all appreciating all these processes that go into all the things that we appreciate. And I think security is definitely, with all the Zoom calling and home security, people on their own PCs and not having networks that people are controlling internally. I think it's created a whole new world of awareness that a lot of us didn't have before.
I'd agree with that.
And those of us who had the awareness were going, boy, there is a 800-pound gorilla in the room and nobody's mentioning it. Nobody's mentioning it.
Nobody's thinking about it. I think that's what's happening. Is it's a conversation that, as you guys mentioned, is that it's happening now. And it's one of those conversations that needs to happen very often, and needs to start in schools as young as elementary school students, to, college students, because when you think about it, they're going from Starbucks to home and jumping on different networks and coming home. And if you're working for a tech company and, you don't know what information is being shared, your child has just brought something home, it's only a disaster. It's downhill from there.
Yes, there's viruses everywhere, right?
Yeah. Now, Zenobia, I watched your TEDx and you did an absolute amazing job. Let me ask you, with your amazing experience and your background, what has been the greatest challenge when communicating some of these complex technologies to the masses? What is the greatest challenge that you've experienced overall?
Yeah, so I think, there is, as information has been more accessible and as people are willing to and just have all of this at their fingertips, there is also the expectation, I think, that technology just works, right? So you can no longer really kind of open up your computers and kind of figure out what's in there, right? Like the next generation's like, yep, I have an iPad and it just works. So I think the perspective of, for those of us who have been around a while, is these things take time to mature, right? They take time to progress. They take time for that adoption to happen. The sort of hype cycle of when technologies really get to be exciting, and then when they get adopted is very different. And so I think making sure that people understand we're still so early in some of these things, right? That don't get discouraged because there are issues, because there are security issues, because there are, downtime issues. If you try to go back and remember the days before, fiber was ubiquitous, right? The internet, there were a ton of critics because people said, this thing is never going to work. Like, why would I use this? It's slow, it's horrible, it doesn't do anything I need. And now you can't imagine. I mean, I look at articles that basically say, like, the internet is dead so long, that was a great experiment, right? And I think
wow.
I think being able to apply that same level of perspective to new technologies as they're coming out, right? So when you're in it day to day, it's almost like, with your children, right? The days are long, but the years are short. And so making sure people understand, look, just because there is an issue with this aspect of the technology today, or just because it doesn't work sort of how you have projected that it should work today, doesn't mean that vision won't come to fruition. But you have to have that patience to understand all of these things have to be all of that innovation has to build on itself, right? If we gave up on mobile devices the first time we did it, I mean, you guys remember the Palm Pilot, the Zune, all of those, yeah, there was sort of a more of a tolerance and patience for technologies maturing when I think we didn't have, the attention span of tiny rodents, right? Today you have generations that say, great, like my interest in entertainment is 30-second clips. I'm not going to watch a 30-minute sitcom. So for them, it's great to have that level of impatience in some ways because it does drive the technology forward. But I think it's also important to be able to communicate and convey that these things are working. They may not be working as well as we'd like in utopia, but they will get there.
So just to play devil's advocate, I had a conversation with one of our youths, one of our interns, and we were talking about, how we communicate our stuff that we have on Techstrong. How do we get it out to the masses? And he was convinced that everybody used Snapchat, and that in 5 years, Snapchat was going to be the thing. And he was saying that today. And I was just chuckling because I'm like, at what point do we realize some of those things? How long do we go before we realize we have to let go and move on? I mean, there's a whole nother, because to me, Snapchat, really, I have 20 somethings and they don't use Snapchat. So the thought for me of 5 years down the road, this being the latest, greatest all of a sudden, and we look at where we are. He's in a generation that they do use it. That's how they communicate. So at what point do we realize, okay, we've pounded our head against the wall long enough, maybe we should try something else?
And that's part of the challenges of technology is the speed at which we're changing.
Exactly.
I used to tell people in the build space and in the DevOps space, we used to have the luxury of time to sort out our pipeline and our brittle scripts because it wasn't going to be for 2 weeks before this was rolling out. But now we're rolling out things in a microservices world. The idea is to roll them out all day long, right? So that time is being compressed. While we used to have that luxury of time, we don't have that anymore. And when we're rolling out changes on a regular basis, new technology is hitting the internet, hitting clusters, hitting the desktops and the phones of end users all the time. So this pace has really changed a lot about how we interact with the world. And now we as customers demand things to be fixed immediately. We don't want to wait for anything.
Instant gratification.
Yeah. To mimic that, I know Zenobia hit a point on that, kind of like saying that, we just can't wait anymore. When we think about it, I know when I grew up, we still had the telephones that were in the walls. Well, by the time by the time I came around, by the time my son came around, he was automatically just FaceTiming me, it was FaceTime. So I remember when I was in high school, I would have to call, leave a message, wait for somebody to call me back. There's no such thing anymore. You FaceTime somebody, they answer, or instant message. So I think there's no patience anywhere across the board.
I'm so guilty. I'll have 50 or 60 messages when I go to check my phone. It's like, why didn't you just text me?
I don't even leave messages. My kids know that if I call, and most of my friends too, if I call them and they don't answer, I just hang up. They see that I have a missed call and they call me back.
Exactly.
Because who wants to listen to a message?
Not me.
They say, hey, I'm sorry I missed you. Can you call me back?
Right.
It's like, missed call, I called you. Give me a call.
Well, and I think, Jody, you brought up a good point about I think we try to also think about the message versus the medium. And so, I think it becomes even more important to make sure that message is crisp and clear and everybody understands it. And then to say, okay, but my area of expertise is not Snapchat. It's not, some of these other platforms. So maybe I need to then build my team so that we have all those different experts on there. But at the end of the day, they are all delivering that same core message across those platforms where it's consistent.
That makes
sense.
Yeah, definitely.
So Zenobia, just to shift a little bit, I understand you were also involved with a group called Forte Group. I think a person like myself needs to learn more about what that is. Could you kind of give us a rundown of what you're working on?
Absolutely. So, yes. So going back to the start of the pandemic, there are, as you all know, the percentage and the number of women in cybersecurity is small but mighty. And I think we got used to seeing each other at conferences. We got used to getting together in person. We got used to sort of, giving each other the nods of, oh yes, it's some of the same folks that we've known for a long time, who we've watched and supported each other growing up in the industry. And when the pandemic came around, Dee Dee Dayton and Chengxi Wang, started having conversations around, well, how do we get this? How do we keep that sense of community? And how do we keep that sense of support among this group when we're no longer able to be together? And so we started meeting informally in 2020. And, it was really a sort of a Slack channel of, women who were fairly senior in their careers in cybersecurity and in privacy. And then it started being, okay, well, let's not just sort of share tips and tricks, but maybe we should, have some education that comes here too. So we brought in speakers who talked about everything from negotiating. We had a Harvard professor come in and talk about, negotiations. We had folks who, now this is a group of fairly senior women. So, we had some of the women present and have a discussion on, okay, how should you negotiate equity comp, right? What are the things that you need to be thinking about? We've had women come in and talk about, if you're thinking about angel investing, what should you be looking for? And then also much more technical topics. So, SBOM being one of them, managing, ransomware risks and cryptocurrency risks being one of them, all topics that are really important in our careers, that also, potentially have some sensitivity. And so we're having a trusted group of other women where you can say, great, this is Chatham House rules, and, nothing gets shared, with attribution beyond this group, has just, I think, been a really valuable resource. But of course, if you are, you all know some of these women, none of them are content to sit on their laurels and say, great, that's wonderful. And we've done this and now, solved. So last year we started talking about, okay, well, how can we, and we actually had some inquiries from people who said, great, this seems like a great group. I'd love to participate in terms of making donations, or I'd love to participate in terms of somehow otherwise sponsoring the group. Internally, we were also talking about, how do we scale, how can we potentially put in place some more infrastructure? So it has been and continues to be all volunteer, but how do we, get in place some of those resources? And then how do we think about potentially supporting that next generation of leaders who, it is incumbent upon us to build that pipeline. A lot of women are multi-time CISOs. A lot of women are in their first role as a CISO. A lot of women are sort of at that one layer down where it's clear that they will be that next generation of security leaders. And so how do we provide the kinds of programming and resources that really strengthen that group and help identify where are the gaps, both in knowledge as well as in networks and support, to make sure that that group is successful, and to make sure that we are also, paying it forward and helping that next generation of potential leaders in our space.
Interesting. Very interesting. So are there, I don't know that particular market that well. Is there are women underserved in those higher level security positions?
So I think, I haven't looked at the data, but I think if you look at, the overall cybersecurity industry, it's I think something like 15%. It's still quite small. And then as you get up the ranks, I think it speaks volumes that we all knew a lot of the senior level women, right? So we started, and it has grown through, hey, I know this person, and I recommend that she be invited to join. But it is a very small group. I think in some ways, it's probably, I don't know how it compares to the overall IT. Female leaders in IT, but it's definitely a small group.
I would say at the Open SSF, in terms of who's on the board, we're probably like 5% women, if that. I'd have to do the math, but let's just give it, the benefit of the doubt, 5%.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I spend my time hunting up folks to be on panels and participate on Techstrong. And one of our shows is called CISO Talk. So we're always looking for C-level. And as someone who does that a lot, I'm just going to put it out there. I could have a panel every day. I have 5 white dudes, but we don't do that at Techstrong. If the panel isn't diverse, we don't record. That's just the standard that our CEO, and I'm very proud of the fact that the CTO, who's my husband, has done that in his whole career. He's always mentored women and helped them to, be able to find a way to get up those ranks, because it's very important to him and he sees their value. It's one of the reasons I love him so much. Tracy and Rebecca both know him, and they know that he's a really good guy that way. But I struggle because, like you said, I end up kind of with the same pool of folks, whether it's women or whether it's women of color or whether it's diversity in general, especially at the C level. And it's super frustrating to watch that. So when I see groups like yours, I get so excited because I see this whole sea of people that I wasn't aware of, that I can reach out to and be like, hey, we're doing this, we're having an event, we're doing a panel, I have a webinar that I need you on, and we need to get to the point where we're just like finding people, and it's not so hard that we have to specifically look for color and sex and gender identity and all those things that are so important. But yeah, definitely those numbers are low.
Yeah, and we absolutely have, folks. So Jody, we can definitely share with you some incredible women to feature there.
On it.
and we're really not.
You bring up a good point about allies though too, right? I mean, we certainly see that there are some incredible allies in the space. So, it is, I would be remiss to not note, the men who get asked to join a panel and say, great, but I'm only going to do it if there is diversity on this panel.
Yeah. I'm getting more and more of that every day. People literally saying, who's on here? I want to know that this is diverse.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and as soon as we get in, we need to get investors thinking that way too. I just want to point out that women only get about, I think, around 2% of the VC funding, 2%. I used to go out and look for funding. And then one day I said to myself, what makes me think I am at the 2% of women who have awesome ideas? And I just decided not to pursue it anymore because it was going to be a waste of my time.
I didn't know.
Which is, a sad statement because of, quite honestly, I think if I was had a different profile, I would have been looked at more closely. But it's 2%. And when you only have 2% of women being lifted up at a co-founder or C-level, you're not going to have a whole lot of diversity come along the way. That is just the case. When you don't have upper management and co-founders and C-level folks who are diverse, you're just not going to have a diverse population at that company.
Yeah. And I think, that's one of the things that we, that's part of, I think, the beauty of this group too, is that there are, there are women who are in VC, there are women who have been angel investors or LPs. And so it's not just about getting access to them, but it's also about saying, okay, well, how can we potentially help you think about how other VCs are thinking about things in their portfolio? What are the kinds of things that you need to have ready if you really do want to go and pitch all these other folks? And how can you, use these networks of other women who have, who have been able to get there to help you?
This is a true story. I was pitching to, I won't say who it was, a VC out of the Silicon Valley. And he listened to my about 5 minutes of my pitch. And he said, I just want to stop you right there. And I was like, okay, fair enough. And he goes, I could never invest in your company. And I was like, great. Tell me why, is my zipper down? Somebody tell me if I have toilet paper stuck to my shoe, right?
Lipstick on my teeth.
Exactly. He said, well, what would happen if your kid got sick?
Oh.
And you know what my response was?
What?
Cool. You think I'm in childbearing years?
Why, thank you.
I did. I said, thank you so much for thinking that. And I said, but how is that different from a man?
Right.
And he said, because it's the women who always stay home with the sick kids. And I don't want to have to deal with that. What would I do? He was honest. And I thanked him for his honesty.
How recent was this?
Last year.
No. Oh my gosh. Oh,
yeah, last year.
Oh boy. I have to behave myself now.
So we have a long way to go. So I'm glad that the Forte Group is addressing that problem because it matters. Every little bite matters, right?
Okay, I have to ask one more question. Age group of this human. What age group was this person in?
It's hard for me to tell age, but I'm guessing he was somewhere between.
Could have babies still.
Yeah, he thought I could have babies, but he probably was younger than me. I look much younger than I am. I'm guessing he was between 40 and 50.
Wow.
I would have expected 10 plus for that.
No.
The fact that attitude is in that age group just makes me.
But he was honest.
I know.
How many other people have I pitched to that didn't tell me that?
Right. He saved you the other 50 minutes of your time.
He did. And I thanked him for it. I did. I thanked him. But like I say, I don't know how many other pitches I had done where they were thinking that and they didn't tell me.
We need to use the format of like The Voice or that show where they wear weird costumes when they sing and nobody knows who they are.
Right.
Because I'm serious. If you put people in a room and you didn't know anything and you just listened to what they had to say, we would not be having this conversation all the time.
Yeah.
It's totally this whole, I'm going to get all wound up. This is bad. I have really, my whole family, my children are very active politically. They're into stuff. So we get a lot of good conversations going on. So I have to behave myself or I'm going to get myself in trouble.
But I think there's been that application, right? Like in the NFL, there's the Rooney Rule, right? In terms of who you have to interview before you appoint someone in a job. I think there's tons of examples where, being able to kind of, unfortunately mask the real identity of someone puts them on a more level playing field. And so, as we think about, I'm not sure that the, Mark Zuckerberg's vision of the metaverse where, look, you can now have a virtual meeting in the metaverse. I was like, wow, that seems like the most painful thing to do. Why would you want the metaverse for that? But if you could think about, potentially your identity in the metaverse, right? And if you had a pitch competition where everybody looked the same and everybody, when they were presenting had the same, avatar, the same environment.
Exactly.
And then you're really allowed to be judged on the merit of your ideas. Maybe that's a more interesting.
I love that. The avatar, everybody's avatar is the same.
Yeah, I was talking to a CEO about this for a fairly large company about how they do this, how they do hiring to try to encourage more women. And the person responded by saying, when we distribute resumes, we take the name off. And my point back was that doesn't work.
Mm-mm.
Because we have to now start saying, give me binders full of women and binders full of diverse people so we can hire from that. Discrimination got us into this mess. Discrimination will get us out of the mess. So the culture has to start shifting to say, it's okay to say, I'm going to look at these resumes from this pile of diversity And we have another pile here that has really skilled people, but we need to look through this specifically. So, discrimination can go both ways, right?
Right.
Let's discriminate to bring some diversity into corporate America, and just taking a name off a resume just isn't going to work, because there's so many more men than women in that particular, in our industry. It's ridiculous how many more men there are than women.
Well, and I think you can read a resume without a name and probably tell a lot about the person, because women speak in a different tone than men a lot of times, right? The way we describe ourselves, the way we describe what we do, it's very different. So I think if you gave me a stack of 10 nameless resumes, I think I could probably identify at least 50% of them by whether they were male or female, maybe higher.
Especially of what they're interested in, right?
Exactly.
They have their interests.
It's too generic. Well, I hate to tell you guys this, but we only have a few more minutes left. Zenobia, tell us what the Forte Group's got going on coming up that people can look for or jump in and check out.
Sure. So yeah, we have now finalized the process. We are officially a nonprofit. So, if anybody would like to contribute or your companies would like to support it, we would love that. You can visit the Forte Group, forte-group.com website. We will also be thinking about ways that we can expand that membership, as I talked about, and those opportunities, so that we are engaging not just, the women who have already sort of fought their way to the senior level, but how do we make that easier for that next generation? I think there is not for many groups, there's the belief of, well, I suffered, so, you should suffer too, right? We're not the Navy SEALs. We're not going through camp like. We've said, okay, great, we've suffered, so let's make it better for those who come after us, and let's figure out how we utilize those same kinds of networking opportunities that have benefited the majority in the past. Like I say, small but mighty. Let's figure out how we use those to our advantage going forward. And how do we think about, how do we cultivate that and make sure that, the people who are, Jody, to your point, not even reviewing the resumes, but also writing the job descriptions, are writing them with diversity in mind. And they are writing them so that they, value those kinds of things. We went to Israel a few years ago, and our tour guide said, so in Israel, all the checkpoints are manned. They're manned by the military, right? And you drive through and you roll down the window and you answer a few questions to typically the woman holding the, AK-14 or whatever it is at the checkpoint. And he said, do you notice, what do you notice? And essentially most of the people at the checkpoints were women. And he said, why do you think that is? And of course, my boys were looking at me like, no idea. And I said, is it because women pay more attention to detail? And absolutely.
That's amazing.
So when you think about cybersecurity, right, those kinds of things that there's a lot of benefit to having that diversity, not only of opinions, but also experiences and of the kinds of things that you're thinking about, because you can bet that the opponent on the other side is not going to just limit their way of thinking to sort of a very traditional mainstream way of thinking. That's not how they got to be hackers and how they got to be on that side. So, we need to use that diversity of thought and opinion and experience to our benefit, because we are not winning the war at this point. So we've got to get better.
Wow, what a great way to wrap this up. Thank you so much for being with us. This was a really great conversation.
It was fascinating meeting and speaking with you, Zenobia. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great. And
we're going to keep in touch, and we're going to watch what you guys are doing. I'm sure you're going to do some great stuff. That's super exciting.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to another episode of Tech Strong Women. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, so please tune in. And every day, tune into Techstrong.tv. We have lots of great stuff out there for you guys to watch. All right. We'll see you later.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
Hey everybody, happy Thursday. Cody J. Brown here with some more upcoming programs happening next week at Techstrong Learning. So Tuesday, October 25th at 11 a.m. Eastern, join us on DevOps.com for top tactics to address cloud security and cost concerns. Palo Alto Networks and Techstrong Research will review a recently conducted survey on challenges in the cloud and share with you tips on how to manage your cloud cost without sacrificing security. The following day on Security Boulevard, Wednesday, October 26th at 11 a.m. Eastern, SUSE takes us through Zero Effort, Zero Trust for blocking 0 days in Kubernetes. Our speaker will discuss modern versus traditional security controls and follow up with a demo on how Zero Trust can prevent exploits like Log4j and Spring4 Shell. And following on DevOps.com, this Plutora assembled panel will review the impact of value stream management, how to get started, and perhaps most importantly, how to get your leadership on board. Join us Wednesday, October 26th at 3 p.m. Eastern for How Do I Get Started and Succeed at Digital Transformation? So that's all I've got for you today, but we do always have plenty of upcoming programs next week. And if you just can't wait until then, feel free to look through our catalog at devops.com/webinars, and we do have plenty of on-demand programs there waiting for you. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Previously on Engineering the Change.
It's kind of like being on a football team. You got to make cuts to the roster, right? But we got to take it down to 3 finalists. Her essay was one of the best essays I've ever read in the 3 or 4 times we've done this.
Yeah.
So,
she's in.
Yeah. But there was, to me, Carly epitomizes why we do this. I give extra bonus points to people who can write well and can express themselves, and Donald did express himself. All right, so let's go through this then. Stephanie Sanchez, Donald Bazil, and Carly Duvel are our 3 finalists for this cohort's Engineering the Change Scholarship.
Engineering the Change has literally changed the lives of scholarship winners. Here are our past recipients.
My name is Victoria Roas. I am an immigrant from Brazil. I came to this country when I was 10 years old.
My name is Drew Johnson. I'm a full-stack software engineer.
My name is Alina Maluk. I'm from Ukraine. I'm the winner of scholarship from 2 cohorts before me.
The Engineering of Change scholarship that I won last year was life-changing.
I really poured my soul and told my story to them, and a few weeks later I got a call from Alan, and it was, I even cried on the phone, I think. And it was like a life-changing moment.
The program at Boca Code was amazing. It was easy for me with zero experience to learn the fundamentals of software development.
My career has completely changed from barely being able to, hold down a job to now being sought after by some of the biggest tech companies in the world.
Boca Code has built me up.
I got a job at hot fintech software company at the day of graduation.
I think that becoming a software engineer has been one of the most rewarding things in my life.
I am Carly Duberval, mother of 2 amazing children. I have a bachelor degree in accounting.
My name is Donald Brazil. I was born in Haiti. I was raised in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Growing up, I've always been interested in technology.
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm originally from Haiti. I've resided in Miami for wherever it feels. I currently have a degree in psychology, and I enjoy helping people.
I migrated recently to Florida because of insecurity and political issue.
I fell into software engineering as something I would love to pursue.
I feel like there is a void that that I still have. There's something tugging at me because I feel like I have not challenged myself to reach my full potential.
Here in the US, my degree is not accepted. I need to work for my family duties.
Winning this scholarship is a great opportunity for me to finally, pursue that career in software engineering. And, I would love to, give back to those who were in my position where they were completely lost and didn't really have any guidance.
My goal is to be a vessel to other people, other underrepresented communities.
Without money and resources, I can't afford to go to Boca Code.
And being a finalist is an amazing opportunity. I would never have thought I would have been even considered.
This field, I will be good at it. And I have an opportunity to make an impact on my community and the world.
If I won this scholarship, I will share my knowledge with other Black women, immigrants who share my faith.
I would love to, have the opportunity at the end of the day to showcase those who believe in me, and then, help others who also, would be in the same position that I am.
Because I know my contribution will make a lifelong impact on the world.
Thanks so much for joining us here for this interview today. And you know what? Making it to the finals for this is an accomplishment in and of itself. And I think it really talks about the kind of person you are. And, reading your essay, I was very, very impressed. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
In 5 years, I will be that software engineer who will help immigrants to achieve their dreams.
5 years, I would love to see myself, slowly opening my organization, have it on the ground, running. I just want to see myself helping others, just like others help me. I just want to give back to those who gave to me.
I see myself hopefully excelling in the field of software engineering, and I don't know exactly what my niche will be. So I know that I'm going to be excelling. I don't know exactly what it'll look like right now, but you guys will be proud.
Why do you want to be a software engineer? What's gonna make you stick through this at the end of the day?
I love it. I can do it. I will do it. Why I will do it? Because I love it.
It's just a great field to get into. The technology portion of it is just something I've always been interested in. As a kid, I've always been interested in computers, phones, gadgets.
I always felt a need to, or a pull toward doing something for someone else. In the field of engineering, allows me to continue to do that, because whether it is in a medical field, the automotive field, just the world of entrepreneurship, there's just so many different ways that I can continue doing good and making an impact.
One of the things that's something that's very near and dear to my heart is, equity, parity, gender diversity, and just diversity and parity on all levels, equality. And I wonder how do you envision going about doing that?
Like I did with my old career, I lift women to accounting in my country. I motivate them, I assist them, and help them to achieve, like I said, to achieve their dream, to be excellent in this field.
I would love to open an organization that can, give back to those and help guide them with the opportunities that I'd had from this experience.
What drives you to do software engineering and not go back to something that you've already known and you've obviously been very successful at?
I would say now everything is technology. So why should I say in accounting? If the world is moving and everything now is tech. I have two brothers. One died in 2007. He was a senior software engineer. My youngest brother is a software engineer. Why not me? It's because I'm woman? No. I want it, I will do it.
At the moment right now, I work inventory for a home installation company. It's a pretty okay job, but it's not what I feel that I was meant to do.
The knowledge I have, I can pass on to other people. I know some of the challenges that our communities face. So with my knowledge and my mentorship, whether it's mentoring one person or just a group of people, exposing them to this field and to just other fields that exist where there's more to life than just what is in front of us. And I believe that I can be a bridge in that gap.
How do you feel like the scholarship is gonna do to you? Like, why is it important for you to win this?
I will share my knowledge with people, with women or immigrants, and use my knowledge to help them.
This scholarship is giving me that opportunity to show the world that I can do great things.
So this scholarship would definitely assist me in changing the trajectory of my life, and hopefully where I can continue this same legacy in helping other people. So.
Your essay was amazing. Your answers here today were amazing. You really do represent what engineering the change is all about. Thanks for coming in today, and we can't wait to announce our winners soon.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hi, welcome. I have the great pleasure of being joined by Nadi Davadi. Nadi is SVP of JFrog Security. Welcome. Glad to be talking with you today.
Hi, Mitch. Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure. So tell us a little bit about yourself for folks that may not know you, a little bit about JFrog. Hopefully many folks know who JFrog is, but if not, we'll introduce them here.
Yeah, so I'm Nadi Davidi. I'm heading the product line of security by JFrog. The role itself is SVP JFrog Security. I came to the company a bit more than a year ago through the acquisition of Vdoo, which is a company that was focused on binary analysis from security point of view. And from our perspective, it's a perfect match because JFrog is all about binaries, starting from the earlier stage of binaries all the way to production. And as time goes by, it is being spread more to the left and more to the right in terms of how to cover the entire end-to-end journey of the software from the moment it is being coded all the way it is being pushed into production. And we are actually coming, our division is to create the layer of security across this entire end-to-end story, not focusing only on shift left or only on production and shift right, but throughout the entire journey of the software, of the liquid software story, to make sure that in all of the great critical junctions, security is being implied properly.
I think that's a super important point, which is it isn't just about any individual point in the process. It's about the whole process, because all of that, of course, can introduce security issues, intended or unintended, depending on if you're the hacker. You have some great news, some exciting news. Tell us about what you're announcing.
Yeah, so we are announcing the new offering of JFrog. We call it the Advanced Security Package. This is a new package that we provide on top of the X-ray capabilities, and this is not the last package that we are about to announce in the sooner future. When the idea is to gradually expand from the software composition analysis focus and software bill of material focus to what we perceive as the true end-to-end supply chain security mechanisms. Because it's not only about bill of material, it's not only about CVEs and known vulnerabilities. There are so many other things that are not clearly defined by regulators. They are implied by regulators. They call them, for example, in the new 7900 bill, they call them defects of security, not vulnerabilities. And there are so many defects. Secrets that are being kept in the binaries and can be utilized by the attacker, bad configuration that can lead to exploitation remotely or locally. Even just the way the container is being is running on a given system. So many attributes of artifacts that are not necessarily CVEs or zero-day or the other very known terms. And what we come with in advanced security is exactly the aggregation of engines and scanners that should cover these many unknowns, these many not so well-defined categories. Now, we clearly gave them names. One of them is more common and known one is infrastructure as code security issues. This is an engine that will look for your Terraform issues. We have secret detection. This is an engine that will look into the binary and look for keys and credentials of many, many kinds, whether you have keys related to AWS or GCP or any other service. We will find them automatically. And the nice thing, again, enclosed binary. It's not in the form of source code. We look at it into the binary. And I will also mention here that that's the magic of binaries. Source code will not necessarily or will necessarily not include many of these things. It will include code. It will not include the secrets and the configuration in many cases, and binary will include them, and they impose the risk, the real risk, because it's much closer to production, the form of the software. So I mentioned infrastructure as code, secret detection, and then we do also configuration analysis for common services and applications like Flask or like Django or Nginx. So we really try to aggregate all of the things that can be found through the binary. We clearly look for malicious packages, which we are pioneering, and more to come. This is not the end. There are many, many, many small capabilities. I left the last one for the end, the most important one. So we had an engine that we call the binary-based contextual analysis, which is also tied into this new build that is coming in. So the contextual analysis allows for the first time to really look into a given binary and tells you if a given CVE is truly exploitable or not. Now, why is it so important? First, because if you take the very common Log4j story as an example, everybody responds with a panic. Everybody across the entire globe try to identify their Log4j packages in the development environment, in production, and then to gradually replace them with a secured one, just because that was the common approach. But I can tell you that more than 70%, at least based on the customer that we worked with, more than 70% of the Log4j vulnerable libraries, vulnerable by definition, are not truly vulnerable because the prerequisite for exploitation isn't met, and it renders the CVE useless. So this contextual analysis allows for the first time to really tell the developer and the security persona and the DevOps persona, listen, you do have this package 1,300 times in your organization, but only in these 4 cases you use the vulnerable function or you truly configure in a way that an attacker can remotely exploit it. And if you are exploitable indeed, the system then gives you a contextual remediation plan, which is not just about upgrade your packages to the next version. It's about change this tiny configuration and you are safe. Even if you have the CVE, you are then safe. And the reason I mentioned the bill, because there are so many publications and articles and criticism about the new bill, but it does say that you can also introduce mitigation plan. And it does say that you need to have zero CVEs that have an impact on the product. But what if these are CVEs that does not have impact on the product? So it's a lot of tactic language issues there that can be interpreted in many ways. But I think the regulator did actually a good job understanding that there are alternatives to just make sure that you don't have CVEs.
Well, if you come from the security world, the network security world, you're very familiar with remediation, not just patching, right? Patching is one form of remediation. And there are lots of ways. Sometimes you can't upgrade software, right? To do that is a much bigger effort. Not everything is built in microservices and easily patchable. So I think security engineers are probably very comfortable, familiar with that approach. In the software world, we don't talk about remediation very often, other than patching and kind of fixing vulnerabilities in our code. You're right, more than defects, right? Security vulnerabilities. As you're introducing this product and as you've worked with customers that have been, I'm sure, working with it before the launch, how do they embrace and accept this idea of remediation, that some things aren't accessible, aren't actually vulnerable, even though it does have security issues?
Yeah, so it takes time to digest. I mean, it's a matter of building a trust in the product that they use and see the effectiveness of it. The way we help the customer understand they can trust the recommendation is by providing the digital evidence. Actually, I mean, if we prove to all three personas, to the security leader, to the DevOps leader, and to the developer, that something has to be fixed or shouldn't be fixed because it just takes time and have zero impact on security, and redirect him or her to the specific evidence showing a specific path with a specific configuration file or a specific function which is vulnerable, this makes especially the developers very happy, because now they can go back to the security persona and say, listen, I really don't need to fix it. Here, I have the proof. Or the security persona saying to them, here, I have the proof that you have to fix it. And this kind of reduce the friction. There are verticals and industries in which it becomes even more important, like in the automotive and medical spaces. I mean, having a vulnerability in insulin pumps, it just means you need to recall all of the pumps if they are not the new generation that you can upgrade remotely, and most of them are not. You just need to recall them to upgrade the software. It's not feasible. It doesn't make any sense. Okay?
Big deal.
Instead, yeah, it's a huge deal, and the regulators are so much, looking into it and find a way to alternative way to deal with that, and that's where remediation and mitigation comes in. Okay, because remediation in many cases is indeed more from the network vector, let's call it, when you do some external actions to reduce the chance that a given vulnerability will be exploited. Mitigations are, in our point of view, are more tactical things that you can do even on the device or on the container on your software that does not require a meaningful architectural change. But again, just a small configuration change that will make it, will put it in a position where the vulnerability is there, but no one can really utilize it. And in these critical verticals and industries, when we come with this story, they really, really like it. In the automotive especially, they really like the story.
Let me connect a couple of dots. I'm curious, you talked about contextualizing, being able to understand, context and how something is used. As part of what you're saying is you really need that build software. You need the runtime software, the binary, to be able to have that contextual. Because in a microservices world, just in the repository, you're not going to know who's calling what all the time. It may not always be in one repository, one location, one code base. So when it's assembled into a set of services or a code base that you can examine, is that part of what you get additional contextual information from?
Exactly. Yeah, we described it accurately, and we are doing it in several different gates. We are doing it as soon as someone, as a developer, compile code into a binary, and then the context will be not that big, okay? And then where it's being pushed to a big service or a container, and then the context is suddenly bigger than that. And then in the context of the full product, just before it's being released to the production, and then you have tons of context, almost everything. And the next thing to come, which is not part of advanced security, is to do it also on runtime. Meaning I
was just going to ask about runtime. That sounds like the next thing.
Yeah, that's definitely, that's the obvious required next step, to make sure that also the thing that we saw just before pushing things to production, to make sure that they are just the same on the runtime, that we are not finding or identifying new things that cause the manipulation of the software, alteration of the software. And this is not about a typical runtime security or endpoint security. By the way, I came from this space. Before this company, I worked in Palo Alto Networks. They acquired my previous company, Cyvera, which built endpoint security. Back days, we were focused on protecting production, laptops, servers, and so on. Here it's about the specific perspective of the software integrity, and to see that your software bill of material is not being changed, to see that things on production are not under threat. Just one nice example. You might have Log4j-like on your product, okay, the package. And even in the last point analysis, the system will analyze it and will tell you it's there, okay? You don't know it's vulnerable yet, of course. And then it goes to production. And then suddenly a researcher finds out that there is a big deal with Log4j. When we will be on runtime, we will be able to tell you, you do have the Log4j, but you don't even use it. It's just dormant on your system. So it's another big aspect. I mean, it means that then the parallel packages in insulin pump, no one will need to upgrade it because the software doesn't even use it, doesn't even call it. And this is, again, a big news to the developers because it reduced dramatically the overhead of upgrading and fixing things. It shortens cycles of delivery of software. It's much more modern and it's all automated. So it reduced also the need for manual pen testing and similar tasks.
Now, Nadia, I'm curious your perspective on this. You know, app security is a hot space right now, API security, a lot of aspects of software. Though I don't know that we've really kind of cracked the nut, if you will, for how to really effectively create a secure software. How does the advanced security package, how is that differentiated in market to other solutions?
Yeah, so I would say there are the two biggest things. First of all, we clearly claim that our engines are the best, okay? Which is an obvious argument. This is for our customers to test against other solutions. But more importantly, first, it's about the aggregation of the capabilities. I mean, having many niche solutions, again, create a lot of overhead for the security team or the developer to aggregate them, to prioritize them, to decide what to fix and what not to fix. Second, and even more importantly, and that's the really big news about security with JFrog, is, okay, you have an issue, what then? What the next thing that you can do in order to fix the issue or to mitigate it across your entire development environment? And with Artifactory, it's almost the only way to say, okay, I have Spring Shell. Let's find it with a click of a button across my entire repositories. Let's update it and send it to the field through distribution, JFrog distribution, or to devices through JFrog Connect. And then not, saving this cycle of 2, 3, 7 weeks of just identifying your software and starting to pushing it to the field. And this is only one use case. I mean, this ability to first prevent things from even coming in using Artifactory as a gateway, you cannot do that if you don't have Artifactory. I mean, you can have a great scanners, but you need something to aggregate all of your software assets to be the Bible of your organization, to the software Bible of your organization. So this is before things coming in. And then after things are going through the journey of software to the field, if something that happens and you want to retrospectively respond to an event, again, with one button of a click, you look through this information and you can take an action. So first, aggregation of the security capabilities in one place. And second, of course, being part of a platform, a DevOps platform, which also allows you to take the action.
Perfect. And that's one of the advantages of kind of a platform starting with Artifactory for keeping your artifacts in a place where you can start that process at the beginning. So I assume you have a place that folks can go check this out, maybe some hands-on working with it in a maybe sandbox environment, something like that.
Yeah, so in our website, in the jfrog.com, you can easily subscribe to the sandbox and get immediately on the spot your credentials and start playing with it and understand how does it work. We also have a beta program for players that would like to start, give us a feedback before we officially launch it. And then other than that, you can also use the free trial and the sorry, I'll stop here because I'm not sure what will be by then on the October 11th, if we'll allow it for free or not.
Okay.
But yes, you can easily access it. And I also encourage everyone to read our security blog post, research.jfrog.com, which is the real enabler for everything I just described, because everything that we build is being supported by tens of vulnerability researchers, the biggest team group here in Israel of researchers, and one of the best out there, that all day long analyzing CVEs to build these applicability scanners to know if your CVE is applicable or not. All day long, they are scanning repositories, public ones, to find malicious packages. They found more than 2,000 so far. And all of this information is being pushed to the platform so our customers can enjoy it on the spot. So everything is accessible through our website, and I welcome everyone to check it.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on the launch, and excited to see folks get their hands on this and get some use of it. I'm sure the security teams will be happy too when the developers bringing information to them about the CVEs that they've either mitigated or resolved. And it's nice to kind of bring that together. So again, congratulations, Nadi Davidi, who's SVP Research Security with JFrog. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Jonathan Rendy. He's a Senior Vice President for Product at PagerDuty, and we're talking about the economy and what goes on in the world these days as it relates to IT. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. Great to be here. Great to be with you.
As they say, it's challenging times out there, and even IT folks are affected by layoffs and staff reductions, and organizations are trying to figure out how to do more with the proverbial less. What are you seeing from folks out there? And is there a need to finally maybe address a lot of these automation things that we've been ignoring for the last few years?
Yeah, I guess the one constant is always change, as they say. And things are very different in the economy now, what we're seeing versus probably 6-7 months ago. And it's interesting. We're a fairly young company. We have a young employee base. And I was just talking to one of the other colleagues I have today or a couple of days ago about, lots of our employees have never really seen an economic downturn like this, not in the last 5-10 years. And I think there's scrutiny happening from a lot of budget owners out there, our customers, our prospects, and they're starting to ask basic questions given potential belt tightening that's happening. Should they be thinking of, a variety of vendors? Should they be looking to consolidate? Top line and digital growth continues to be the lifebloods of their business, but how can they do that efficiently? How can they do that with an eye towards the bottom line? I think those are a lot of the discussions we're getting pulled into. And of course, automation always plays a role, and it plays a really central role, especially when you're trying to do more with less.
What do you think has always been the biggest challenge with finding ways to automate things? I mean, we theoretically have the skill sets. We're all IT professionals, and yet there's still a lot of manual processes out there. So time and again, what do we keep running into?
It's a really good point of discussion. I always think that automation is such a broad word, and there are so many types of automation. There's so many different flavors of it. And I think there's automating what people do in workflows. There's automating machine activities and giving that to the fingertips of individuals and knowledge workers and subject matter experts. There's all kinds of different. There's automating of events that don't involve people at all. and taking action on that ahead of time. There's tons of automation that's AI related and non-AI related. I think one of the biggest challenges has been and will continue to be organizational readiness and kind of maturity towards the right kind of automation for the problems that people are seeing. There's never been a lack of feeling the pain from repetitive tasks, activities that people feel that could be done over and over again. But it's usually the people issues, the human to human interaction that causes the friction. Meaning, do we feel comfortable with this type of automation? Is it something that we don't want to hand on the button, so to speak? Is it something that we can recover from or change if it starts? Do we have the expertise in-house to actually implement and get it going and then maintain it over time? There are a whole host of challenges to your question, and so many of them start with just the social, the cultural aspect of the organization we seem to find over and over again.
Do we maybe not start the conversation on the right foot because people hear automation and they go, my job's threatened. But in reality, what we're really kind of saying is, your job has a lot of drudgery involved and it kind of sucks in some ways. And we're trying to automate it a little bit to make it easier and a little more perhaps enjoyable. So maybe we just aren't leading with the right message up front.
You bring up a great point. Years ago, I used to work in an industry when it first came out. This was 20 years ago. I'm dating myself. Automated testing, and all testing of software and applications used to be manual. And it was, kind of considered the stepping stone into development. You had to do this drudgery and you had to pay your dues before you could get into a developer or an engineering role. And a lot of early vendors in that space used to have messaging and positioning much like what you're talking about, which is, hey, eliminate the need for people, eliminate. That usually doesn't resonate well in organizations I've found over the years. There's a lot of resistance to that for a lot of good and sometimes not so good reasons. And I think what I learned then, and it still pays forward now, just like it did back then, is it frees up people to do higher value activities. So even back to that example, if I had somebody manually testing something over and over again and writing down that this is what they did and this particular test passed manually, well, if I freed them up to automate that process, what higher level activities that would add more value could they be doing versus just eliminating their job? And I think that's where the real power comes in. We talk about two modes in automation at PagerDuty, and one has to do with fully automatic, almost like a robot taking over. And that's a very mature and oftentimes challenging objective to get to. But then we also talk about a step to get there that a lot of organizations take, and we refer to it as the Iron Man step, kind of the machine assist, where you can do more with automation. And how powerful is the Marvel character Iron Man because of his suit and because of what he can do. He can do a lot more, and that's really the concept that seems to resonate more often than not.
All right, well, I think that name Jarvis is probably trademarked, so we can't go by that. But, to the other side of the coin, right? The IT environment itself is becoming more complex. It's more extended than ever, and we don't have enough people to throw at this whole equation. So at our current rate of growth, won't automation as an issue get forced because ultimately we're more distributed than ever?
It will. I believe it will. And I couldn't agree more. I think that we have so few experts in certain areas, and every organization seems to tax and stretch those individuals to the limit, to the point of burnout, to the point of where they can't do more. And that leads to dissatisfaction, that leads to turnover, that leads to, again, problems in retaining key individuals, sometimes and oftentimes the most important individuals in a company. That if we don't, for most businesses, for key organizations, if you don't implement some level of automation to offload those individuals, they'll leave. And then where are you as a business with those, those most highly valued individuals with that deep expert and knowledge? And by the way, wouldn't it make sense to codify some of that and share it so that you don't become, as a business, single, choke points or single points of failure in an organization? And so there's so many great reasons to take a mature and kind of an evolutionary approach to automation. It can pay big dividends.
All right. You mean the day when Bob quits and he took all his scripts with him and nothing's documented? That day? Yeah, I seem to remember that day.
And the day after that is the deer in headlights. Oops. Exactly. What do we do?
Exactly. There's one wag once said, though, the trouble with automation is it's one thing to be wrong, it's another thing to be wrong at scale. So how do we put some guardrails in place here so that, perchance that we do something that's a little, shall we say, off the mark, that things just don't go completely haywire?
Yeah, this defines the statement, like doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome is insanity. So we don't want that. And I think I touched on it a little bit before, this notion of machine assist and people assist, the notion of automating steps to a broader goal. If you think of the concept of runbook automation, which has been around for a long time, or just runbooks, think of it as a set of steps that an individual needs to go through when they're in a kind of a dire situation, a time sensitive, time critical situation. They have to walk through each of the steps, and those rules are really important. Some of those things can be automated, but just giving the individual a button to push for step 3 or step 7 of a 12-step or a 13 or a 20-step process can save a lot of time and can make things a lot easier. So I referenced this before, but this notion of evolving and automating kind of the lowest risk, most tedious, most repetitive tasks first usually show the greatest gains. And then working up to a level of sophistication where you can link steps 3, 5, and 7, and then maybe steps 3, 1, 2, 3, 5, and 7, and evolving in that kind of a way. Once there's a cultural norm in an organization, it becomes really important.
All right. And to follow up on your point, everywhere we turn these days, somebody's talking about AI for this and AI for that. And we have AI ops, of course. What is real about AI ops, and are our expectations too high or maybe too low, or what exactly should we be thinking about here? And as you look in your crystal ball for the coming year, what's next?
I really don't think the expectations are too high. And I think there's a lot of great advances that have been made, and I've seen it with many of our customers, the benefits they get from solutions around the space we refer to as AI ops. And there's such a exponential growth of information and data today that making sense of it it's pushing the limits of what's possible. And thereby, if we don't address it in a different approach, like AI ops, looking at the information from a machine point of view and making suggestions that, again, an individual can take action on, good, bad, yes, no, use, not use. It just seems like a wasted opportunity not to look at that as a part of the decision making. Now, again, going back to kind of automation and AI ops, should everything be automated? Well, it depends on what that thing is. And it depends on how much you want to string together and fully pull people out of the loop. And the question I always ask in those situations is, if you want to completely remove individuals, what is the thing what is the work item that we're trying to accomplish? How risky is it? If it's a very low priority, great example is, you think of major disruptions and incidents in an organization, and they're usually ranked from a kind of a priority 0 or a P0 all the way to a P4, which is, it's just kind of a paper cut. Well, wouldn't it make sense to kind of work on those paper cut level first that create interruptions and disruptions to people unnecessarily, versus the P0 or the P1, where a shopping cart is down during Black Friday on the most important shopping day of the year? Probably. We don't want to take the wrong actions on those kind of things, but there are so many areas that there's low-hanging fruit that just reduce the noise and the toil and the frustration that everyone deals with, that can get great benefits right out of the gate with what we have today.
You heard it here first, guys. We're trying to make IT fun again. Hey, Jonathan, thanks for being on the show.
Mike, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Ridhima Das, who's CEO for Triple Blind, and we're going to be talking about how to balance privacy and security. They're kind of closely related, but they're somewhat different, and there's a lot of different nuances. And of course, we now have this thing called blind data, which I'm going to let our guest explain. Ridhima, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Mike. Great to be here.
So what do we mean by blind data these days? I mean, is this data that we don't see, or is it data we can access but not everybody else sees? Kind of explain what's going on.
Yeah, so historically, as we've thought about working with data, the first step historically has always been look at the data, try to understand what the data has, and then work with it. Blind data challenges that paradigm by saying that you don't really need to look at each individual record of the data to get the right insights out of that data. You want to just be able to model the data, or want to be able to access and query and operate on the data without necessarily having an ability to examine each record, as well as look at the individual cells, if you will, in an Excel spreadsheet that contain that data, to be able to determine what the macro patterns there might be. So for example, if you're looking at somebody's EKG to try to determine whether they might have a particular propensity for a particular cardiac disease, you don't really need a person to be able to look at that EKG. You need your algorithm to be able to process it and give you an answer without necessarily allowing a human being anywhere in that process to be able to look at it. So that's what we mean by blind data, which is the ability to work with data without moving it, storing it in your systems, or having an ability to look into it.
Well, that sounds reasonable. So what's the hard part in making that happen exactly?
Yeah, so historically, computers have worked by operating on data, by loading it into memory and operating on it, right? And so what that means is we've used state-of-the-art security to keep data safe at rest when it's in our possession. We've used state-of-the-art security to keep data safe in transit when it's on its way to the user's location. But then when it gets to the user's location, their device or their computers or their servers, it gets decrypted. It gets regenerated in its original format. And that is where we lose the ability to enforce governance on the data, meaning we just have to rely on human trust to say, please don't use the data that's in your possession. And we don't have the ability to enforce, the blind data guarantees that I talked about earlier. How do you enforce, say, somebody's inability to abuse the data or use the data for something other than what was intended to do? So these blind data primitives that are up and coming, what they allow you to do is effectively work with data without your computer ever having a copy of the data in the raw. And so you do not have the ability to abuse it. For example, in the earlier example where I said, the EKG was being analyzed for a particular disease A, may not be able to then analyze it for a particular disease B, even though it may be using the same EKG. So you can enforce very, very fine-tuned, granular governance or digital rights on the data, because the data is never effectively in your possession in a way that you can run any arbitrary operation or algorithm or code on it.
We are seeing a lot more regulations lately in this space. Is it getting easier to comply with those regulations as a result of blind data capabilities? Is there a correlation? And do people have an understanding of how to maybe go about complying with those regulations? Or are they just kind of scratching their heads and going, well, we don't really have any mechanisms to enforce privacy policies?
That's a great question. Yes, blind data usage paradigms greatly simplify the compliance procedures for these global regulations on data privacy that have emerged. Since 2018 alone, over 100 countries have come up with a version of data residency regulation. What that means is that the data needs to be kept resident within the borders of a particular country while put to the country to derive insights. We've also seen Europe strike down the US-EU Privacy Shield, which allowed for certain types of data to be transferred between Europe and the United States. So in the absence of those data transfer schemes that allowed us to effectively a legal safe harbor to be able to process data, techniques like blind data operations on data allow us to use that data in those countries, in those regulatory regimes, without running afoul of the regulations that govern that data. Effectively, what that means, if you remember earlier, I described how the data does not need to be moved or seen or potentially abused as part of an operation when blind data operations are being used. You can effectively mathematically guarantee compliance with those regulations as opposed to needing to rely on compliance in the human best practices form. So you can effectively prove that the data will never be used in a non-compliant way.
There's a lot of cost in making sure that the certain people cannot access certain data because you have a lot more requirements now, and theoretically you have to be able to show proofs that these people did not access that, or that if they can see it, then you've got to kind of show that they are trusted individuals. And there's a lot of overhead in this whole process. So do people really understand what it is they're getting into, and maybe are they thinking through the costs, or are they just kind of not really understanding just how expensive this may really get?
Yeah, I think, at the moment, the industry hasn't coalesced around a particular set of best practices. I think, for example, we see in media and advertising, effectively large systems like Apple and Google play the role of the regulator. Whereas in other industries like healthcare and financial services, governments and certain industry best practices are effectively the regulator. So what that leads enterprises towards is a set of, if you will, heterogeneous regulatory and compliance requirements that don't speak to each other. So in those environments, a comprehensive data governance framework that's effectively able to comply with all of these requirements, whether they be regulatory or platform rules or any of the other requirements that are imposed on the data as even from potentially an ethical standpoint, can really simplify the compliance procedures, and of course, in the process, reduce costs of also compliance as well as the non-compliance fines and regulatory violations that might occur.
What exactly is going to be the relationship between the security team and the folks in charge of privacy? Are they one and the same, or are they starting to see like two different groups emerge?
Good question. We are seeing that a chief data officer is typically working with the privacy officers of an organization to govern, to lead the privacy practice in a particular organization. In that process, the CISO is involved in the process. So the security teams and the security infrastructure teams are involved in the process, but we're starting to see a lot of enterprises go towards having privacy be a distinct focus and practice area in the organization. We still occasionally see security teams being privacy, and there's a slight nuance in how you interpret privacy in the context of security versus privacy in the context of regulatory compliance, right? For example, you probably will use cloud computing or other shared hardware or shared infrastructure systems where you need to keep your data information private from other tenants of the same machines. That is a privacy concern that security teams are thinking about. There's also the privacy concerns that emerge out of regulatory compliance or the types of stuff that we talked about with GDPR or HIPAA or other regulations. Those are typically in the realm of a privacy officer who's typically got some legal background or a compliance background that's helping the enterprises comply from a regulatory perspective. So we see privacy spanning both sides of the domain, but increasingly going more and more towards the privacy officers.
How automated can all of this stuff get? We hear a lot about artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms. Will that get applied in this space?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of automation in terms of detecting what PII potentially is, and then effectively ensuring that the right compliance requirements are put against it. For example, in HIPAA, or under HIPAA in the United States, you are required to not share 18 key identifiers about a patient. These include attributes like gender and age and other attributes that might uniquely identify a patient. In that realm, we're seeing the use of artificial intelligence and other automated techniques effectively come up with synthetic data on the fly that allows a data scientist to understand, for example, patterns about how many males or females or what type of age distributions there are in a particular data set without actually being able to look at the real data. So yes, we're seeing a lot of automation emerge, especially in those using key technologies like generative adversarial networks and GANs that actually generate data on the fly in a way that's privacy preserving, but yet allow a data scientist to understand what the patterns of the data is. I want to be clear that the actual operations do operate on the real data, but the synthetic data is helpful in helping a data scientist or a data analyst understand what the exploratory phase of the data analysis might look like.
All right, cool. When do you think that we might have in the US a national approach to privacy issues? Because I think one of the problems we're having right now is that we have all these different states and everybody seems to be going down their own path. And before you know it, we'll have these 50 different regulations for 50 different states. And the overhead will be more trouble than the actual task if we just had one national law. So what do you expect? I mean, what's your timeline for when we might see something come out of Congress that a president would sign that we could all say, okay, this is our approach?
That's a good question. So as a startup, you typically operate on a time frame that's faster, hopefully, and than the regulatory process. So I'm not waiting with my breath held here as to when a federal privacy statute might emerge. However, I'm hopeful that before, in the middle of this decade, we'll see some kind of overarching privacy guidelines at a federal level that most state statutes can point towards. However, what I think from an enterprise perspective, how we should be thinking about it is while there are 50 states, there's also over 100 countries that will all have their own version of data privacy regulation. And so as we're thinking about potentially using a tool or a framework to govern that data, we should be thinking about a tool that allows the flexibility to adapt as these regulations and regulatory guidelines evolve so that we can stay agile and not make a purchase, for example, or use a particular technique that only works for a particular given regulatory regime.
So what's your best advice to folks as they address these issues? Because, a lot of them, frankly, the management of the data is something of a mess, or should they be concentrating on some other aspect of this to get prepared?
Yeah, I think the advice I have for folks is to be thinking a couple decades out. Data is an asset. Data has historically been underutilized because it has been confined to the four walls of an organization. Blind data tools and similar privacy innovations allow that data to be used to its fullest potential in a way that data can actually be a revenue generating asset as opposed to just something you keep. I think we've heard for about the last decade that says, oh, we're doing this, but the actual value is in the data, right? And so finally, the tools are here where you don't have to strike a balance between ethics and the utility of that data. And you can actually maximize the utility of the data, whether within the four walls of the organization or outside, in a way that does not run afoul of the ethical concerns on the data, the regulations on the data, or the compliance standards on that data. And so I would be thinking about how do I make data an asset that works for me over the next couple of decades, as opposed to how do I just store data and hope that someday I will, find somebody internal to the organization that can use it.
All right, folks, you heard it here. Data may be an asset, but maybe you don't really own it. Maybe you're just being lent it for a while and people expect you to be responsible for its usage. Hey, Das, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had a great slate of interviews with industry professionals to give you the latest in the tech world. And alongside our airing of Engineering the Change and Techstrong Women, we had plenty of great content today. We'll be back again on Monday, so we hope to see you then. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.